You call the roll.
Ms. Bumke,
Here.
Mr. Cavalier,
Here.
Mr. Cohen,
Here.
Mr. Dudenheffer,
Here.
Mrs. Mauer,
Here.
Ms. Shelton,
Here.
Mr. Snellings.
Here.
Madam, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Old habits are hard to break. At this time, I want to turn the meeting over to Ms. Shelton, who has a presentation of a proclamation. Ms. Shelton.
We don't often get to do extremely fun things, but this one is awesome. Every year, isn't it on? It says on, yeah, okay. Just got to get closer. And so, oh, I can't touch the baby because I don't want to make the baby sick. And so what's really cool about this, guys, is we have in our audience, and you guys come on forward, is we have the very first baby that was born in 2019 for Stafford County. And, would you mind getting me my coin too, if you don't mind? So, I would like to read a proclamation to you guys. And so we want to congratulate you, first of all, for having such a beautiful, beautiful baby. And I'm glad he's healthy enough to come. And so thank you guys for coming. So, whereas Ja'Kai Malcolm Odie was born at 12:01 a.m. on Tuesday, January 1st, 2019 at Stafford Hospital, and whereas Ja'Kai was the first baby born in Stafford County in 2019 and the first baby born in 2019 in the Fredericksburg region. And whereas at birth, Ja'Kai Malcolm Odie weighed 7 pounds, 8 ounces and was 20 inches long. Whereas Ja'Kai is the son of Shaquila Mason and Jerome Odie, residents of Stafford County, and now, therefore, let it be proclaimed the Stafford County Board of Supervisors on the 22nd day of January 2019, that it be and hereby does recognize Ja'Kai Malcolm Odie as the first baby born in Stafford County in 2019. Is that awesome? You guys can read And I have a special present for the baby. I don't think he can chew on this, so you watch out for that. As we would like to present to you guys for him later on. That is a coin from Stafford County, from the Board of Supervisors to you guys. And love you guys. Thank you very much for being that. Okay, you guys.
And I also like to recognize the head of the Stafford Hospital, Kathy Yablonsky. Wave your hand, Kathy. They do a great job over there. Are there any additions or deletions?
No, Mr. Chairman, there are none.
Do I have a motion for approval of the regular agenda?
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second in discussion. Cast your votes. Tally the votes. There we go. At this time, we're going to entertain presentations by the public. Anyone that would like to speak on any subject, unless it is a public hearing this evening. You'll have to come back for that. When you come to the podium, we ask that you state your name and address. You will have 3 minutes to speak on any subject. When the green light will come on when you state your name and address, when you have about a minute left, the yellow light will come on, and when it's time to shut it down, the red light. So do I have anyone on my right-hand side that wants to address the board? Please come forward.
Paul Wadowski, 8 Picket Lane. Yeah, I changed my image for you. Ha ha. You know, when you're elected, you get to pick your commissioners. Once again, we spent another year and we still have utility commissioners. We're the only county of 95 counties with utility commissioners. Thank goodness there's no stipend. But the one thing, you know, when you're not going to run for office again, you cannot pick your candidates. It's just one of those things. It's a nice try. You want to do that, you can fill out my petition for 125 signatures. Didn't even have to make new signs for Where's Waldo. I'm just going to run for Rock Hill Supervisor. Just as a side note, but I'm really running for Commissioner of Revenue. Maybe I'll come out on the front steps and I'll wear my Air Force uniform in celebration of my 25-year anniversary, February 1st, that I'm retired. I read in the Freelance Star about Mr. Cole. He wants to pose a new way to redistrict. It's always funny when I look at a politician and they go, well, let's pick 3 Democrats and let's pick 3 Republicans and let's make a commission. Now, there's no weaknesses in Democrats or Republicans. They're both equally inept. Now, when you're an independent, which is what One Virginia 2021 proposes, we'll let you have your 3 Democrats, your 3 Republicans, and we want 4 independents. And who knows, maybe we'll even build a wall. You just never know what we're going to do. Just amazes me what he came up with. He says that he did not want to include independents because they can be hard to define in a state where voters do not register by party. Well, someday when I meet Mr. Cole again, I'll remind him that Virginia is not a state. It's a commonwealth. There are only 45 states. There are 4 commonwealths. And a young man many years ago reminded me that there's the Republic of Texas. I used to think that there was a Republic of California. But then again, we see the leadership that comes out of California. See you tonight.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else on my right like to address the board? Anyone on my left? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Madam Clerk, it's reports by board members.
Ms. Shelton?
Thank you. I get to go first today. How fun is that? What a wonderful new year this has been. I wanted to reach out to all the people in Aquia. Thank you guys for attending the last roundtable in a short town hall that we had in preparation. Remind them that we're continuing to have additional town halls, including tomorrow night, on our transportation study that's new and dear to all the people in Brook Road that are concerned with their issues, so please attend that. My only meeting that I would like to talk about was I went to the NAACP induction ceremony along with everyone else here, and I want to thank those people that are newly elected in their office, and I want us to continue to be the type of Stafford County that we all want to be, with peace and love to everyone, recognizing everyone as equals and as rightful residents in Stafford County as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Ms. Bomke?
Yes, thank you. I want to thank Donna Lewis from UMW for inviting me to speak to the Elder Studies Group attendees out at the graduate campus last week. I shared our strategic plan and what's happening in Stafford County with about 30 different residents. It was very exciting, and I think they were kind of invigorated by what they heard. VDOT is hosting the Route 17 Interchange meeting on Wednesday, January 30th from 5 to 7 p.m. At James Monroe High School, if you'd like to see the new plans on that. I would like to mention that we already had the transportation meeting at Drew Middle School on our comprehensive road study. The citizens were very excited about the road study, but I will share with you that there was a lot of frustration and discussion about VDOT and their lack of maintenance. I think that that's because they're underfunded. But anyway, we did tell the citizens that were there that we would be addressing their concerns with the local VDOT staff. And lastly, I would just like to share that yesterday I attended with many other interested and concerned citizens the Human Trafficking Forum and panel discussion hosted by the General Federation of Women's Clubs of Virginia. The panel was phenomenal. It included one survivor and the mother of a survivor. I'll just tell you, there were gut-wrenching stories about young girls being trafficked. and they had no idea what life they were walking into when they were approached by attractive young men trying to get to know them. So along with one of our deputies who's worked very hard on this, the panel was a gentleman by the name of Bill Wolf, who's the executive director of a new project called Just Ask Prevention Project. And I've given each one of you here, and there are some up in the county admin's office, about the Just Ask Prevention Project. Because what happens in a lot of hospital situations, somebody will go in with the victim into the emergency room, and the physicians will not ask the victim what happened to them. Well, they will, but the person sitting next to them will answer the question. And so what we're finding is that we need education out there with our young people. I also found out yesterday that VACO does have some legislation for human trafficking victims so that they can be taken care of, that they're not the criminal in this particular case, as they've many times been made out to be. But anyway, last October, President Trump and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo awarded this gentleman, Mr. Wolf, who started the Just Ask Prevention Project. They gave him recognition that he deserved. So just want to give you these statistics. Over 300,000 kids were trafficked in the U.S. this year. A child is sold every 30 seconds in America. It's the second largest criminal enterprise in the world. And I spoke to one of the survivors yesterday and asked her, what kind of people are these that own this racket? She said, they look like all of us. They're married, have working lives, and you would have no idea what they are participating in. It doesn't discriminate, and we need to start the education process here in Stafford County. Fairfax has already launched this Just Ask Prevention Project, and also they have recently adopted a sex trafficking awareness curriculum in their schools, which is the first of its kind. So anyway, I'll be speaking with Dr. Chase, the Falmouth School Board member, about how we can educate our young girls. This Friday at UMW, there is a free play called Between the Cracks, a play about human trafficking. It's in Lee Hall in room 411. Lastly, I just want to thank our utilities crew that was out for the last 24 hours on Enon Road. I don't know about you, but I could only stay out in the bitter cold for about 3 minutes. So thank you, and a big shout out to them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Cavalier?
Thank you, Cheryl. Some things that I did here the last couple of weeks, first and foremost was had a meeting with the new contracts administrator, and Mr. Foley and Mr. Smith and Mr. Presley sat in with me along with Janice from the county attorney's office. And if you haven't met the lady who's our new contracts administrator, I hope you can soon, because she's absolutely fantastic. Everything that she said needed to be said and needs to be done. She understands what our issues are, and I think she's going to do a lot to help us get over this hurdle and start writing and executing contracts in the manner which they're supposed to be, and therefore saving us as a county lots of money and time for projects. So I think that's a new hire that's going to pay for itself time and time again. So I'm very pleased and look forward to continued good work there. Also went to the Fredericksburg Regional Alliance meeting. Their new thing is to develop a new regional strategic plan, which will update the one that's several years old right now. So we showed, I think that's being done in the next month or two, so we'll get an update on that as it develops. I'll be part of that process. I attended the last school redistricting, or one of the school redistricting town halls. Seems like
the consultants presented plans that really moves a lot of children between 3,000 and 3,800 in each of their scenarios. So it's going to disrupt a lot of people if the school board goes with either one of those plans. I don't think too many people are particularly happy, so I'm hoping the school board takes what the consultants gave them and develops an alternative. I also chaired the Public Safety Committee today. A couple of big issues were retention issues in the Sheriff's Department. So we'll be addressing those. It's part of our compensation study in general, but it's budget time, so that's right on cue. And then the new issue of a public safety training center came up to replace our current training building that is really was just a converted old boat building, and it really leaves a lot to be desired. So that's a possibility of a new capital facility here in the county, but we've got a lot of work to do on that before that comes to fruition. And and there's another transportation town hall being held tomorrow night, Wednesday, at Moncure Elementary School at 7 p.m. was rescheduled because of the snow day last Monday at the schools. So if you have an interest in the roads, that's the place to be tomorrow night. And then last but not least, I'm going to officially state for the record today that I'm going to fully support the SEA's position on pay raises this year. And so I just wanted to get that out there early, and we'll see what we can do. We like to have parity from one side of the street to the other, so depending on what the school board decides to do, I plan to support an equal amount for the county government employees. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Mr. Cohen?
Thank you, Ms. Giles. It was rather busy couple weeks as well. I also met with the new contract administrator. This is a very impressive individual who I think is going to do great things for the county, and it's great to see the county continuing to move forward in this way. Also met with one of my committees. It's the Healthy Generations, which is continually to do great work to help our senior citizens in our community. Attended the transportation meeting along with Ms. Bomke and Mr. Snellings. It's very interesting that the people who spoke were most interested in road maintenance issues rather than new road issues. So that was an interesting to hear from people and what they think are the most important priorities. Like Ms. Shelton said, I was one of the many of us that went to the NAACP initiation for the new officers, and it's very important that the community come together when we can work together to get things accomplished, which is great. Was lucky to be asked to meet with some of the county employees as well as a school employee to work on another initiative for our local government and our schools. As we know that the third graders come to the school to come up to the county to do see what goes on in the county government and do a sort of a mock board meeting. Student Government Day is something that's been going on for many, many years, of which I've only had a role in for almost 20 of it, which is for seniors. And then there was a desire to try to do something for our middle schools. And so it was really excellent that the idea came forth for seventh graders who take civics to have a contest, video contest, where they can learn and show things about local government. And so if you have a child in seventh grade, look forward to hearing from their teachers as to that initiative. And that way we're trying to make sure that children across the spectrum at all our schools have an access and know what we do in the local government. And lastly, Ms. Maurer said her piece last meeting. I'll say my piece this meeting. And earlier today, I dropped off my paperwork to officially make myself a candidate for re-election for the George Washington District for Supervisor in 2019. And so I think that's, to me, rather exciting. And I'll end with that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Dudenheffer?
Thank you, Marcia. Last week, we were notified by the Pence Group, who are developing the Garrison, that they've reached an agreement with Regal, which has held up the project for the last 4 or more months. And in their words, they would like to start moving dirt with all little technicalities that need to be hurdled, I guess, along the way, nothing significant, but start moving dirt in March. So there's been tremendous amount of naysayers on Facebook. Everyone has a rumor. I think people throw stuff out that they know is incorrect just to get a rise out of people. And some of the derogatory and negative things that are said are almost sometimes very almost offensive, but you get used to it. You hear a lot about our transportation study. This is something we've been working on since last February, March timeframe. I can't tell you how important this is for this important issue that affects Stafford County. This is a time period where in my family we do a lot of reflecting on road safety and children riding on roads. It's critical, and this road study not only looks at congestion, but it looks at road safety in those areas where we can improve the road safety for not only our teenagers, but everyone who rides on our roads. There has been an uptick in the number of fatalities that we've been having on our roads, and that's very disconcerting for me. 15 years ago tomorrow, my daughter was killed in a car accident here in Stafford. So this whole situation becomes very personal for me. I want to protect your children as much as I want to protect my grandchildren as we go forward. It's just that important. But the only way we make headways is if people actually stop complaining and come out and participate. So I'm asking people that have any interest or believe that our roads are either congested or unsafe to get off of it and come out and look at what we're doing and give your opinions on things that we may have missed or not missed, because we're going to move forward. None of the projects on that list will be completed or even attempted to be completed unless there's some kind of a financial plan on that, and we'll be working on that over the rest of the winter and the spring. And it's going to be time for us to kind of put up or shut up, I think, with a lot of our road projects. Anyone pays attention, the Smart Scale project, which is the way the state funds road projects now, they came out with their Phase 3, which are road projects that would be funded in 2025, 2026, some in that time frame. And Stafford County got one project approved for about $1 million out of the $800 million that were up for grabs at this. So anyone who thinks that we can sit around and wait for VDOT to come to our aid, fix our roads, deal with the problem, are living in fantasy land. So please come out and help us. We've spent an amazing amount of staff hours and people that have put in their heart and soul into the movement forward that we're trying to do. So I appeal to you personally to get involved. That's all I need to say. Thank you.
Mrs. Maurer.
Thank you. A couple of things. I also attended the NAACP installation of officers. It was a wonderful presentation. I wish all of the new officers much success in the coming year. We have a lot of challenges here in Stafford County. But it was really inspirational to hear from our Lieutenant Governor, Justin Fairfax. He has one of the most beautiful stories I have heard about his inauguration. And if you haven't ever heard his story about when he was inaugurated, it's one you should look up and read about. Also had the pleasure of attending the Alpha Phi Alpha Black and Gold Ball, which was just an amazing event. We have this wonderful group of African-American male leaders here in Stafford County that are members of Alpha Phi Alpha, and they got together in celebration of Martin Luther King Jr. Just some brilliant minds in that room, and I really appreciated having the opportunity to go. We had a legislative committee meeting. We've had a couple of them over the last couple of weeks. All of our efforts are moving forward. Some of them not as well as others. The proffer bill still appears to be contentious. It is the recommendation of the Legislative Committee that this board take no position on the changes to the proffer bill. However, there are still some language in there that I find very concerning, and that is the direct and material benefit. However, we are making some progress on the proffer bill. It doesn't go as far as I think our Legislative Committee would like to see. Personally, I would like to see an impact fee bill. I think that is the fairest way to go. In addition to that, both Mark and I attended the VRE meeting, and I was appointed as the chair of the Finance Committee. So as I start to move on and finish out my term, it seems like I'm picking up more committees. But I really look forward to working with the VRE and looking at the way we're looking at new financial policies. More importantly, for this board, we're looking at some subsidy, looking at how the subsidies are allocated. And so I will be reporting back to this board on any progress on that. And the last thing, Mr. Chairman, I would like to remove item number 8. And I'm sorry, I have one more item. I also met with the contracts administrator. I really appreciate you, Mr. Foley, and this board for persevering and ensuring that this contracts administrator, even though it was supposed to be a shared position with the schools, that we have moved forward with this contracts administrator position. However, in the briefing that I received, which is very similar to the briefing that the other board members had received, I have some serious concerns with the way we're doing our procurement, both on this side of the street and the other side of the street. And at some point, I believe that we need to, either at the next meeting or the meeting after that, have a full briefing by the contracts administrator for the benefit of all residents of Stafford County. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes my remarks.
And Mr. Snellings.
Just very briefly, I attended the transportation forum last week that Mr. Dudenheffer, Mr. Cohen, and others were speaking of, and quite frankly, I was very disappointed. We have 146,000 people, give or take a few hundred in this county. A total of 7 of you showed up. So if this is really a problem, then you need to come tell us. If it's really a problem, you need to come and see how we're proposing to solve it. There's another meeting, I believe, on Thursday night. Is that correct? Wednesday night, I'm sorry. So I urge you to attend. I mean, we don't know what's on your mind unless you come to these meetings. Quit relying on Facebook. I mean, you know, it's anyway, enough said. Report by the county attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no report at this time.
Report by the county administrator.
Mr. Chairman, we have two items, our mid-year financial review and an update on the financial condition of the R Board. I will mention that during the FAB committee meeting today, there was a suggestion that we make an amendment to the resolution you have before you for action regarding the holdback of appropriations, and Andrea, our budget director, will address that with you so we can get that clear. There will need to be an adjustment to your action on the consent agenda.
Yes, Ms. Mallon.
In the agenda that we had approved, do we need to pull that item off of the consent and approve the amended resolution, or is that amended resolution part of the add-on?
And I'll let the county attorney, she was just trying to catch me on how we need to do that, so I'll let her comment.
I would recommend pulling the item and then making a motion on the amended resolution.
What's
Mr.
the
Chairman,
item?
is that okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay.
What's the item?
And I believe we'll have those to hand out at your place, or that, okay.
Item
Mr.
4.
Chairman, it's item number 4.
Right, thank you. Okay. Ms. Light.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the board, I'm Andrea Light, Department Division Director. Okay, every time. On. Great. Here to present the mid-year review. At mid-year, revenues are projecting slightly below the budget. This is approximately 0.2%. This is largely fueled by our change in exoneration growth for real estate, which has increased about $1.7 million in calendar year 2018. Personal property is also affected by exonerations and is slightly under budget. Revenues are performing slightly under budget. Staff is prepared for the board's consideration a partial release of the 5% appropriation hold on proposed resolution R19-40 that you were just speaking about. We have made an amendment based on our FAB's recommendation to also hold back a public day school funding of $285,000, which was in the fiscal year 19 budget, but will not be used in this fiscal year. This is a conservative mitigation and it allows staff to continue to monitor our revenues and expenditures. Local non-property taxes continue to remain strong sources of revenue. Sales, meals, and transient occupancy continue to provide projections above budget. In fiscal years 2017 and fiscal year 2018, you'll recall that we had a number of new apartments that were providing above projections for the revenues for building permits and fees. In the current fiscal year, these revenues are normalizing to provide a continued and steady sustainable growth. The health insurance enacted by the board continues to provide savings, and our vacancy savings budgeted at $500,000 in fiscal year 19 is projected to be slightly above that savings. The Juvenile Detention Center, which is funded by the member jurisdictions at the budgeted percentage usage. At the end of the year, this calculation is trued up. Right now, Stafford is below our projection, and so we are looking at a possible savings. Debt service is projecting some savings this year, due mostly in part to favorable rates and the timing of our borrowing. Private day school costs in the fiscal year 19 budgets, the assumptions are listed here. We assume 93 students at $72,000. The board's vigilance in the stewardship of taxpayer dollars is reflective in the projected savings of the private day school. In our fiscal year 19 projections, we're only looking at 79 students at a cost of maybe $69,000. As part of the 5% appropriation release on proposed resolution R1940, it is provided for the board's consideration to not appropriate the projected day school savings. And we will continue to monitor and keep the board abreast of any changes in assumptions.
Ms. Maurer.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to take this opportunity to kind of explain to the amended appropriations that we're doing. One of the items that we budgeted for last year was an additional $250,000 or $290,000.
$285,000.
See, I had it wrong. It was in 200. $285,000 to expand the private day school program. The school board opted not to expand the private day school program, so we are, because that money has been previously appropriated, we're going to go ahead and keep that money on this side of the street because they did not implement a program with which we had budgeted during our budgeting process. So that is the genesis for the amended appropriations.
Yes, Ms. Bonke.
So on the debt service savings of $600,000,
Yes, ma'am.
how much debt was issued with that kind of savings? Because the market didn't move that much. I understand we had a AAA, but that's
Certainly.
a
The
big savings.
The
So
majority of that savings is the timing of the master lease for fire and rescue apparatus. We were able to push the beginning of those, the need for that debt service out, so we only have one payment instead of two, and that provided a significant amount of that savings.
okay, so it wasn't the interest rate in the market that generated the savings, it was breaking up the debt.
Sure, it's a little bit of both. Our VPSA was at about 3.55%, and in our budget, we assume 4.5%. So there's a little bit of savings there that we had on VPSA, not anything significant, but it's mostly due to the timing of the debt service.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Through our turnover vacancy savings in social services, the department is projected to come in under budget by about $579,000 for fiscal year 2019. Again, proposed resolution R19-40 suggests that we hold this additional appropriation and monitor as we go through the rest of the budget year. The general fund balance is projected to meet all financial policies. The capital projects reserve that is available for spending right now is about $1.6 million, and that can be programmed as a revenue source into the fiscal year 2020 CIP. Overall, the utilities fund continues a steady and modest revenue growth and are slightly above budget. Pro rata revenues are exceeding budget projections and expenditures are slightly below. Overall, transportation projections are favorable. Although only 3 months of gas tax are provided, early indications are for continued stabilized growth. This is due in part to the CROC funding. Interest rates are generating revenue above budget, and operating expenditures are in line with budget.
Ms. Maurer.
I'd like to take this opportunity to, once again, on the gas tax reporting, even though the state level is behind from a PRTC perspective, which is where this money comes in, we're looking at hopefully a $900,000 surplus this year due to the change in legislation and the establishment of the floor.
Schools ADM is projecting along with budget, so their state revenue, again, is tracking along budget. Expenditures, there's only 4 payrolls of teacher salaries that have been posted due to the way the accruals are processed. So at mid-year, it's a little bit harder for them to determine what their expenditures will look like. At their quarter, we'll have better information. And their health insurance continues the same trend as the county. In conclusion, the partial hold on appropriation, the remaining 5% of the budget, is a conservative mitigating measure as we continue to monitor incoming revenues and needs. Through the expenditure savings, staff does anticipate that we will have the $1 million for the transportation fund that the board earmarked in the fiscal year 2019 CIP.
Any other questions for Ms. Light? Thank you very much, Andre.
Thank you.
Good report. Mr. Foley.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Dayton is here to give his report on the R Board.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Keith Dayton, I'm the Regional Landfill Director. I'm pleased to give you the FY18 Auditors Summary. That is, of course, as of June 30th of last year. May I have the computer, please? It's on. Okay. Thank you. So the financial statement completed by Terry Beckert is essentially completed, has not been finalized on a few procedural matters, but all of the numbers are finished and crunched, so that's what we're reporting on here. And the highlights include our assets increasing by nearly $3 million. Our liabilities also increased, and that is something similar to what happened with the county, the new GASB 75 recording of OPEB liability. That was total of $2.7 million, so that increased our liability quite a bit. Our net position improved $2.4 million, so we're now at $10.5 million. That's our overall financial standing. But our unrestricted net position, with all of the liabilities that we have subtracted out, improved approximately $1.3 million. So we now have a positive unrestricted surplus of $0.7 million. That is the first time we've been in the positive since 2013, where we were about $70,000 to the black. So it's been a turnaround that's taken a number of years. Our operating revenues continue to increase, $1.3 million in the last fiscal year.
Excuse me, Mr. Dayton, Ms. Bumke.
So, Mr. Dayton, the statement that you made regarding the 2013, that we haven't been in the black since then, I thought it had been many years before that. Did that include all of the liabilities and expenditures that we had regarding cells that were closed?
Yes, Ms. Bomke, the unrestricted net position takes all of that into account. So in 2013, we were about $75,000 to the good. Then we dropped into the negative. That doesn't mean we were out of money. Our reserves have always been positive. It's just that the liabilities against those foreclosure, post-closure expenses brought that down into a concerning position, and we're now bounced back out of that.
Okay, thank you.
So our revenues did increase, our expenses decreased. That's partly due to getting past construction of cell F2, but it's also a conscious decision on the part of the R Board to try and turn that unrestricted net position around and get us back to being in the black, and that was successful, as I mentioned. We now have over $8.6 million in our long-term investment fund and $2.6 million in our cash account. So we're right now about $11.3 million in our reserves. How do we get there? Flow control is the largest single factor in that, but there's other things that come into play. Flow control is an action taken by the city and the county, wherein trash that's generated in the city and the county must come to the regional landfill. So that has increased the amount of solid waste across the scale and increased the revenue. So that is the biggest single factor. But the resident fees collected almost $600,000. That is money that we never used to see, and as we put it onto our balance sheet, that's been a major player in turning things around. The other things that we've done is continue to analyze where the solid waste comes from, how much it costs us to process it and get it in the landfill, and make sure that our services are the fees for our services are commensurate with the cost of our services. So we're paying a lot of attention to that, and we're continually adjusting our fees to match that. To do that, we have to collect better data, and we are doing that. We now know where the trash is sourced when it comes to us, commercial sectors, residential sectors, and that sort of thing, and we are able to make decisions and adjust fees accordingly. Our audit findings, they didn't have any, so that's, I believe, is a very good sign of our procedures and processes and financial status. A little bit of long-term walk down memory lane, as it were. Our reserve fund balance, you can see it moving back in the direction it should be. So it is a considerable amount at $11.3 million, but keeping in mind that the number of liabilities that we have against that is still significant, but we need to continue that growth in the reserve fund going forward. Unrestricted net asset, again, this is the way we see how we're really doing, and you will see that up on the far right, we have now moved above the line and are now positive. Just a quick look ahead. This year, we are through the 50% point of the year, we are doing very well again. We held expenses down, trying to continue this trend. We did double up our payments on cell F2 to both the city and the county. We were trying to position ourselves for cell F3 to come, and we're paying off the loan that those two localities provided for that cell. But looking a little further into the future, we see some increased equipment costs that will be probably reflected in the next budget. We have a lot of equipment that's 15 to 30 years old. And because of flow control, we're having to use it a lot more. So I think what you'll see in the next budget, while we plan to continue this trend, it may level off somewhat as we get ourselves back in position for the long haul going forward. So with that, if there's any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Dayton? Ms. Shelton?
Mr. Dayton, I noticed you didn't talk about our issues with recycling. And so I'm glad that we're moving forward and we're positive. And I'm also very happy that you brought up some of the challenges that people may not be aware of about our equipment. During that time period where we were losing money, we were not able to fix and maintain the equipment that we have. So we have a lot of equipment that is absolutely needs to be replaced. So I'm glad to see that we're moving in a positive statement. I know that was not a question, but I just want to make sure people were aware that we have some significant challenges due to the cost of recycling. Our board is addressing those as we go forward. And that's it, Mr. Dayton. Thank you.
Any other questions, Ms. Baumke?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that the board knew why we had Mr. Dayton make this presentation, because as you saw, for many years, our assets and our reserve balances were dropping. Ms. Shelton and I are serving on the R board, or did last year. I guess we'll talk about that later today. And I was chairman last year of the R board, and I specifically said to Mr. Foley and Mr. Dayton, we need to continue to have a presentation in front of the board on the R board, because it is a partnership with the city, and the way we handle trash is changing in this world. And we need to be on top of our game all the time, and most importantly, on the financial side of it. So that's why I wanted this presentation to happen in January. So thank you very much, Mr. Dayton.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Dayton. We appreciate it. And thank you, Ms. Baumke. It was a good idea to have him here. Let's move on to consent. Do I have a motion for consent, less items 4 and 8?
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Cohen, a second by Ms. Maurer. Any discussion? Cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion carries 7-0. Item number 4, Ms. Maurer.
Mr. Chairman, as I explained earlier, there was a holdback for the savings for CSA. In addition to that, there was a program that we budgeted and appropriated during the budgeting process that the school board did not implement, and so I have asked to have those funds removed from the 5% holdback as well. Interesting to note on the CSA funds, whenever we are over budget or they are over budget, we're constantly sending more and more money across the street. So this is the first time it's really nice that the savings are flowing a different way. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I make a motion for the amended resolution.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Second. A motion by Ms. Maurer, second by Ms. Shelton. Any discussion? Cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion carries 7-0. Item number 8, Ms. Maurer.
Yes, I have a couple of questions on item number 8.
Good afternoon.
Hi,
Jason
Mr. Towery.
Director of Public Works.
This one is actually going to be very simple. It says that we have budgeted and appropriated $1.75 million over the course of several resolutions, and that the bid that we're looking for or looking at approving is $1.3 million, leaving an amount left over of $400,000, but we're looking for an additional $350,000. The math is not adding up in my head.
Sure. So the 1.75 dollar figure that's in there so far, that's a conglomeration actually of various contracts, utility relocation, construction contracts, I'm sorry, not construction contracts, right-of-way acquisition, utility relocation fees and so forth to date. We had previously, this year was the first time that transportation fund had budgeted and appropriated with the CIP. So there were certain funds previously budgeted and appropriated for construction on this. The construction is a little bit more than we originally anticipated. We're still within our overall budget of $2,075,000.
So if we're within our overall budget, so are you saying that originally we budgeted $2 million for this? We have budgeted and appropriated to date $1.75 million. The
Correct.
contract came at $1.3 million. What other contracts are making up that delta of $400,000 that we need the additional $350,000?
So I'm happy to send.
What's
I've
the
got
total
the
right now that we're sitting at on costs with the $1.3 million contract and and the other previous contracts?
The total anticipated cost right now, including this, is $2,056,771.
Okay, now that's the total anticipated cost. Is that the total
Correct.
contracted cost? Like we've received bids on this?
Yes, that
Okay.
is including the construction bid number that you have
Alrighty.
there in front of you.
Okay, I appreciate that. The
Sure.
way the way the background package
It's
was
a little-
written, it was a little confusing, and so when we're looking at adding money and it doesn't add up, if we can just add a little bit more detail to that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve.
Have a motion to have a second. A
I
motion by
guess, I
Ms.
guess I won't motion or approve since it's my district, right?
You can second.
Second.
He's second.
Go ahead.
I have a motion by Ms. Mauer, a second by
I didn't know I was
Mr.
going to get it run over on this one.
Mr. Cavalier. Having a discussion? No discussion, cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion carries 7-0. Item number 14, discussion of Board of Supervisors bylaws and rules of procedure. Mr. Dudenheffer, Ms. Mauer, are you ready to discuss?
Righty. Well, Mr. Dudenheffer, would you like to start, or would you like me? Or,
Be my guest.
all righty.
I'll
So-
correct you when you're wrong.
Oh, there we go. I appreciate that. Or how about you just propose a difference of opinion? We have been going back and forth with the bylaws. It was discussed at great length over several board meetings last year. And then we made a motion to defer this item to this meeting. There is a redlined version of the bylaws in here. I think it encapsulates most of some of the concerns of the board members that we heard during the several different, it keeps the current committee system as we have. I'm a big supporter of the current committee system with Finance and Budget, CEDC, Public Safety, and the Infrastructure Committee. What it does add is a little bit of a change on how things are referred to that committee. And I want my fellow board members to note that the items that get put on the agenda are being referred by the board as opposed to everybody being able to throw something on the committee. To Ms. Shelton's concern, which is a valid concern, the way the committees operate, nothing ever stops in the committee. So in the bylaws, it is very clear that any board member can add an item to the agenda. They can add 2 items to the agenda at any time. So if a recommendation comes out of the committee that is not favorable on an issue, that issue does not stop in a committee. It can still be added to the regular board agenda and taken before the full board. And one final item I want to note on the ad hoc committees, and this is going to be a change that I'm going to recommend, is that we have the ad hoc committee of the legislative committee, but there is no ad hoc committee for the bylaws committee. So we have committee assignments in the next action that shows the bylaws committee, but nowhere in these board bylaws is there a mention of the bylaws committee. And I would like to ask the board to amend the red line version to add the bylaws committee to that section in which we reference ad hoc committees.
Mr. Dudenheffer.
As a member of this committee, I'm actually pretty confused as to exactly where this discussion has circulated and gotten us to. So what I would prefer we do at this point is that with the county attorney, that this circulate back to the bylaws committee. If you will recall, when we first were aggressively talking about changes to the bylaws, and there are definitely issues that need to be changed to bring it in accordance with the state law and things that we've been doing incorrect. But at this point, we were talking about abolishing the committee system, not abolishing the committee. There was a bunch of churn in that, and to be honest, where we are right now, I'm not comfortable with where they are. So I would like to have this referred back to the committee and with board members to review that red line version and then come to the bylaws committee with any changes that they think or things they have concerned about so we can look at it. This would, and that we bring this back the second meeting next month and work on that. So would you object to that, Ms. Mauer?
So I have a couple of concerns on that.
Why am I surprised?
I know. Well, we've had several months to have these discussions, and there are some items in these bylaws that we need to change, particularly because of state code issues. And so I thought we had encapsulated most of the concerns, but if you feel that there are other items, I'm going to defer to how the rest of the board feels, and I'd like to have input before I before I plant my flag.
Well, I think we need to have a motion, either to move forward today or to defer before we have discussion.
Then I would move that we refer this back to the committee to come back with a report and a recommendation at our second meeting in February.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Dudenheffer. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second by Mr. Cavalier. Discussion.
What, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Cavalier.
Yeah, because I think staff pretty much did a nice job at putting together everyone's comments over a period of meetings for this, but as far as it being pinned down exactly like we needed, I don't think that was ever completely washed. A couple items in particular, timeliness, I think, is really not addressed well in here, because if everything has to come from the board to get to a committee, the next committee meeting in some cases would be a month at least after the board meeting, and that doesn't really do us a whole lot of good if the issue is fairly timely. It also proposes that all updates and informational items formerly given to committees be presented to the board instead. And that means the sheriff and the fire chief from public safety would have to come in here and spend the hour or more that we spent today in committee speaking to the board in our afternoon session, which we all know right now we don't seem to have enough time for. And so I think, informational items, update items like that are routine matters, I think are best handled by the committee's system as it is now. And I also think that there are going to be items that require a little bit more timeliness, and this new system does not provide for timeliness.
Any other discussion? Yes, Ms. Bonke?
So I actually have a couple of questions regarding like section 5.2, under 7 days, it indicates. Is that calendar days? Is that business days? I think we need to be more specific there. Section 5.2 is board members' request for discussion items, because this item actually came up at a FAMPO meeting, so. And then also on the ad hoc committees, I don't have a problem with the ad hocs, except I think it should only be 2 board members instead of 3. I think 3 board members can sometimes get us into trouble. And also, I think we need to have a deadline or something in there about when we want to hear back from that ad hoc committee, or do they come back and give us monthly updates? We need to have more of a structured process, I believe, there. And as far as, I actually could vote for these today. I just know that I want to have a more transparent process with the community. That's what this is all about in my mind, is making sure that our community knows about items that are going to be coming before the board. And however we can do that and make it more transparent, that's what I'm in favor of.
Any other discussion? Ms. Shelton?
I'm sorry, Mr. Cohen. I agree with you, Ms. Bomke, because that was one of the things I was going to bring up, is one of the things I did not like about our ad hoc committees before is that there were no deadlines. There was no set time. Sometime it would take them almost a year before we'd find out what was going on. So I think it was important, again, for the transparency of if we're going to have these type of ad hoc committees that we establish, that they need to have some accountability back to the board. And I agree. We've been looking at these bylaws for a couple of months now, so I'm ready to make a decision on them today. I get the fact that we are not always perfect. Things will change. We have an opportunity to change in the future.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My only request would be that if this comes back on another day, is that we have a very clear delineation as to what elements are just addressing state code, so that we could take care of that ASAP, and then have these other issues separately. And then if they end up having more discussion or whatnot, they can be handled that way. But I just think that if there's something that is a state code issue, it'd be easier just to knock it off right away. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Any other discussion? Mr. Dudenheffer?
Ms. McClendon, do you have anything that you add to that? I mean, are we missing any points here that you would say we are?
Mr. Chairman and Supervisor Dudenheffer, no, I don't believe you're missing any points. As to the state code issue, I would like to note that everything the board's doing is currently in line with state code. Staff has suggested some clarity in the bylaws to help put into place some of the practices the board is already doing, but I would not say there's state code issues specifically, and the board's bylaws, as they are workable. We're just trying to elicit clarity in the bylaws. The board's committee structure is kind of a separate issue that staff has really just been looking for direction on.
Any other discussion? I plan to vote for deferral, and let me explain why. I've kind of taken a 180 on this. I had a long discussion with a couple of board members, and I agree that having everything come to the board, then go to committee, will just bog everything down. And I don't think it's going to be good for the public. I don't think it's going to be good for our government or the board. So I'm going to vote for deferral. With that said, cast your votes. Yes for deferral, no for no deferral. Cast your vote. Tally the vote. Carries 4-3. This is deferred to the second meeting in February. New business. Item number 16, Parks, Recreation, Community Facilities, Economic Development. Authorize the county administrator to execute an agreement with, I'm sorry, I just skipped right over one. County administration, consider standing committee board appointments. So we've got a list here of the committee appointments, and let's go through them real quick. Bylaws committee, we've got Mr. Dudenheffer and Ms. Shelton. I don't see anyone else that wants to serve. Are the two of you willing to continue?
Actually, I was getting off and Ms. Shelton was getting on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is there a reason why we only have 2 members on that? I'm wondering if maybe 3-member committee might, because we may not be able to come up with a recommendation. Well, we'd have to
We
advertise
have
it.
to advertise anyway, because it's an ad hoc committee, we always advertise.
It's just a thought. I didn't understand why we only had 2 people there and we've had 3 on most of the other stuff that we deal with, so.
I'm okay with doing 3 if that's the will of the board.
You want to stay on and we add
You want to stay on?
Ms. Shelton?
All right.
Okay, I have Mr. Dudenheffer, Ms. Shelton, Ms. Maurer. County Attorney, we need to vote on these individually.
You don't have to vote on them individually. I would suggest a vote at the end once you have your membership established.
Okay, thank you. CEDC, Mr. Cohen, Ms. Maurer, Mr. Shelton, and Mr. Snellings.
Mr. Chairman, since it's normally a committee of 3, I'm willing to take my name off of that committee to allow you to go on to it.
Okay, is everyone else good? FAB, Mr. Cavalier, Mr. Dudenheffer, Ms. Maurer. See no changes there. Infrastructure, Ms. Bomke, Mr. Cavalier, Mr. Dudenheffer, Ms. Shelton. So we've got, right now, who's serving infrastructure? Ms. Bomke, Mr. Cavalier, Mr. Dudenheffer. So does anyone want to give up a seat? Apparently not. Yes.
So, Mr. Chairman, as I was looking at this, I was looking at, like last year when I was chairman, I only served on one committee, which was infrastructure. And I think you and I had a little conversation about if, and that looks like that might be the case with CEDC. Or wait, are you staying on CEDC?
Yeah, he's staying on.
I'm staying on
Right,
that,
and
but
then you're probably going to be giving up public safety, right?
that's correct.
Okay, so if we did that with you, and then if you looked at the rest of the board members, not including legislative and bylaws, because they're kind of different committees, it looks like if everybody's on 2, that's the fair and equitable way to do it.
Okay, so we've got Ms. Bomke, Mr. Cavalier, Mr. Dudenheffer, and Ms. Shelton. Does anyone want to drop off?
If I could offer, I don't think that 2 number is going to work because 3 on bylaws, okay, that we added 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 committees. One will have two,
Are
so
we counting bylaws
Yeah,
and
but I don't think we
legislative?
should count bylaws and legislative.
Because I'll give up my
They're-
seat on legislative in a
They're ad
heartbeat.
hoc committees, they're not standing committees, so I feel like they're not really that relevant.
Well, I think we all need to keep in mind, most all of us attend the meetings anyway, and we're able to participate. The only thing is, you do not have a vote.
plus if you look at the committees that are the outside committees, some people are on a lot more there. Some people choose to be more on the inside committees. So
Correct.
That's,
Well, but as-
that's a fair distribution then.
Let's,
You have to look at the overall picture.
Right, but as I said today in an email, somebody sent out an email with the fact that I'm on 8 outside committees. 3 are alternates. I am more than happy to give up the R Board, GWRC. If anybody wants any of my committees, because you got to prepare for all of them, you can have them. Anybody interested?
Okay, I'm going to take infrastructure, we'll set to the side. Joint Schools Working Committee, we're pending. I'll be meeting with the superintendent of schools on Thursday and the chair and vice chair of the school board to discuss that further. Legislative, Mr. Dudenheffer, Ms. Shelton, is that still good?
If anybody wants my seat, they can have it.
And Public Safety, I'll be dropping off. It'll be Ms. Bomke, Mr. Cavalier, Mr. Cohen. With regards to infrastructure, I mean, we could sit here and talk for the next hour and a half, but I'm not willing to do that. So we will set that one aside, and I would ask the 4 members on there to get together in person or by phone or some way and kind of settle it. Come back to the next meeting and let me know which one of you does not want to serve. With that said, we go to we have to vote. Do I have a motion to approve the committee assignments with the exception of infrastructure?
So move.
Have a motion and a second. Do I have any discussion? Cast your vote?
Yeah, so-
Oh, I'm sorry.
So here would be the discussion. So at the next meeting, we have infrastructure and CEDC.
Yep.
So who would sit at the next infrastructure? Would
Well,
that be the old from
I'll let
last year?
Yes, I'll let the county attorney verify or correct me, but I think the current committee would continue to serve until the new committee is appointed,
Mr.
right?
Chairman, I would suggest making that part of your motion. I believe the motion at the last meeting was only that the committee members would carry over to this meeting. So that would need to be included in the motion that you're considering now for that one committee's membership to carry over to the next meeting.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, I amend my motion to include that the committee structure or the membership of the infrastructure committee be carried over until our next meeting.
Does the second agree with that?
Yes, I do.
Any discussion? No discussion, cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion carries 7-0. Now we can go to new business. Parks and Rec, authorize the county administrator to execute an agreement with and transfer funds to the EDA for the Gauntlet Golf Course at Curtis Park. Mr. Morris.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'm Mike Morris, Director of Parks, Recreation, and Community Facilities. The intent of this item is to provide some assistance to the operator of the Gauntlet Golf Course. As you may know, this was the wettest year on record, and thus causing some conditions at the golf course that were unusual. The greens at the golf course received a disease and were completely were dead, essentially, and had to be regrown. It caused some loss of revenue and also had some expenses involved in regenerating those greens, which are slowly coming back to health and are anticipated to be back to health sometime in April. We are requesting this go through to EDA due to some state laws that require that, and so thus the EDA's involvement. The item is a discussion item for you today and then would reappear at your next meeting, February 5th, as a consent item pending your discussion. So I'd be glad to entertain any questions if you might have any.
Any questions for Mr. Morris? Ms. Mauer?
Do you want to go first?
You go first, Wendy.
Okay. A couple of questions on this particular agreement. So when I'm reading in the background package, I notice that they have to make this $25,000 payment. And then is there a revenue sharing on this? I need a copy of the original agreement in order to fully understand the full scope of this.
It's just a straight lease agreement for $25,000 a year.
Okay, so there is no revenue sharing?
No, ma'am.
Because it says or more
Well,
in the background package.
There is,
That-
if, I should amend that, there is one provision if it's over a certain dollar figure. So we can get you the original agreement.
Okay,
Yes.
because some of the other concerns that I have without seeing the original agreement is a lot of the costs that we outline here, I mean, those are costs that they would have taken into consideration before they entered into the agreement in the first place. These aren't weather-related costs. If you're talking about, them updating the clubhouse and cutting trees back,
ma'am.
all of that is not weather-related, but we kind of added as part of the justification for this lease agreement. What I would like to parse out is actually the true impact of the weather, because everything that's listed on here had absolutely nothing to do with the weather.
No, you're correct. Those are other items that they've done since they took over the lease of the
Right, but
property.
those were taken into consideration when we negotiated the original lease agreement, I'm
correct.
assuming.
That's correct.
Okay, so if we could just add that information when we come back, that will give me a broader picture.
Absolutely.
Ms. Bonke?
Yes, since I had a brother that owned a golf course, I have some similar questions about this regarding the damage to the greens. And I guess my question is if they were going to be leasing this facility from us, I kind of wonder about their financial viability if they can't make their lease payments. Is that what I'm hearing here, is that they can't make a $25,000 lease payment to Stafford County?
The golf operator has not requested that we do this. This is something that we thought might be in the best interest of the county-owned facility.
Okay, so they have not requested this yet? Okay. Was that in the background report?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, okay. So if we approve this, or it's for new business, so we wouldn't actually approve it till the next meeting.
Correct.
Did we get a copy of their financial statements, or did we have any? Because I would think that all the things that they did in the clubhouse, they would have done those on a loan through their financial institution, not as cash projects.
Correct.
So I guess I just need a little bit more information on who they were when we entered into this lease agreement, et cetera.
Yes, actually, their financials are not due to us yet. It's
Okay.
after the first, it's now January, so they'll be due to us very shortly, but we do not
Okay,
have
but
them
would we
yet.
have had those from last year? When did we enter into this agreement with
We
them?
entered in March of 2018.
Of 2018. So did they give us a copy of that at that point in time, Mike?
They gave us I believe they gave us a tentative budget
Okay,
at that time.
okay. Is there any way we could get a copy of
Sure.
that? All right, thank you.
Anyone else? No one else? I actually brought this to the board. I went up and met with the owner, along with Mike. He opened this business earlier last year, had a big grand opening, has done wonders for that golf club, and all of a sudden, he was hit with some type of a blight. And he had the before and after. As a matter of fact, we went out and looked at some greens, and you just could not play on them. So he did not request that we waive the fee. I suggested it to try to get him through this. So if you'd like to visit the golf course with me, you're welcome to do so. But the one thing that I don't want to happen, I know no one else on this board does either, we don't want to lose the gauntlet. It is a great drawing card for folks. So we'll bring it back to the next meeting, and Mr. Morris, you just get the information that Ms. Mauer and Ms.
Additional
Bonke have asked
information in the
for.
agenda packet for the next time.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr.
Just
Cavanaugh.
wanted to point out that this occurrence of the greens being ruined basically this year is fairly common throughout this region.
It is.
A lot of it had to do with the record rainfall we had this year, and then some extreme heat in July. So it just didn't suit golf course greens very well.
No,
It's
and I
it's a
understand
common
that.
problem.
My main concern with, here's a guy and his family opening a brand-new business, and in the first year, just get slapped with this, so. But anyway, we can discuss it further at our next meeting. Thank you, Mr. Morris. Item number 17, discuss the Belmont Ferry Farm Trail, Phase 6, alignment and point of termination. Justin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Jason Towery, Director of Public Works. Here to discuss the Belmont to Ferry Farm Trail, Phase 6. So this item has been discussed on a couple occasions before with the board. In September of 2017, a preferred alignment was originally discussed with a total cost of about almost $2.5 million, and that was, of course, to extend Phase 6 from the area of Chatham Bridge down to the George Washington boyhood home at Ferry Farm. And, of course, there were some issues in securing the easements necessary to make that entire alignment possible. So in last July, staff presented to the Infrastructure Committee some various options that would avoid the foundation property, and the committee recommended 2-to-1 to connect the trail at the Cool Springs Road bike lanes. So staff has actually been proceeding generally in that direction. We're approaching a 30% design and felt the need to come back to the board and just discuss and finalize this last piece of the trail alignment and ensure that this is the direction from the board as to the final terminus of that trail. It is funded through the TAP program, so that's mostly federal funds. 80% of the project cost is funded through federal funds, and the other 20% is the county-funded portion. And the other mitigating factor at this point is that VDOT has discussed that the federal rescission action recently is causing some of these projects to be pushed along a little bit more. We're trying to get to a good decision point, particularly as it comes to final design and appropriation of the funds. I apologize. I think I lost a slide there. Okay, I did lose a slide, but I'll talk from this one. So in this slide, you'll see the overall alignment. The section of green that's shown on the alignment is the Phase 6 alignment, and then the piece, there's two pieces there. One is shown in red and one is shown in white, if you can see that. The three options before the board for discussion are to terminate the Phase 6 trail with the current Phase 6 design at the area of Jet Drive. That would end there approximately where the green line ends. A second option would be to connect the trail to the bicycle lanes at Cool Springs Road. This is the decision that the Infrastructure Committee recommended last July. So then the trail would actually cross there, Route 3, and connect at Cool Spring Road. And then, of course, a final option would be the continuation of the trail down the other side of the Ferry Road, of Route 3, across from the foundation property, and terminate on the north side to Ferry Road. There are funding differences, and sorry, here's a blow-up of that. I should have shown you that on the previous one so you can see it a little more closely. There are funding differences depending which alignment the board would like to go with. As you can see there, the original, and I'm looking now at the bottom line where it has total, the original project cost was about 2.47. If we chose to terminate at the Jet Drive, that was again the green alignment, the total cost is projected to be at 1.9. The Cool Springs Road terminus, just over $2 million, and at the Ferry Road terminus, which is the red portion of the alignment, is still close to the original project budget of 2.5. I'd be happy to answer any questions at this point.
Any questions from Mr. Towery? No questions? Thank you very much, sir. And that will come back at our next meeting. Item number 18, refer to the Planning Commission an ordinance to amend and reordain County Code 28.24 measurements to reduce the encroachment into side yards for outside basement entrances and ingress-egress window wells. Mr. Harvey.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, board members. I'm Jeff Harvey, the Director of Planning and Zoning, and I have a presentation I'd like to go through with regard to this matter. First off, this is a consideration of whether or not to refer an item to the Planning Commission for potential public hearings.
Mr. Harvey, I'm sorry, I didn't get a PowerPoint from you on this one.
Okay, well, thank you.
Do you have it electronically? I can pull it up.
Don't worry about it. The Community and Economic Development Committee did discuss this in November. The issue has come up in our planned development districts where we allow smaller lot sizes, specifically smaller lot widths. And we've observed in some instances where we've had encroachments into the side yard of those smaller lots, specifically with single-family detached homes. The side yard encroachments that are in consideration for discussion deal with the emergency exit wells for basement bedrooms and also recessed steps for basement bedrooms. Unfortunately, when we were looking at plans, we noticed that the zoning reviewers were reviewing the setbacks for the building based on the wall location rather than the underground encroachments. So that created a problem for approximately 129 homes within the Embry Mill neighborhood. These underground encroachments.
Excuse me, Mr. Harvey. Ms. Maurer has a question.
Yeah, so I know that we've talked about this several months ago, and have we issued any more permits that violate this in the several months with which we've been looking at this?
No, ma'am. Once we determined we had a problem, then we stopped issuing those types of encroachments.
Okay.
Specifically, our ordinance currently says that we can have encroachments up to 6 feet within any side yard, but no closer than 6 feet to the side property line.
Right.
In the case of the small lots, we have situations where, in some cases, the houses are 5 feet from the property line, so no encroachments would be allowed.
Right.
And we also have some instances where there's a 0 lot line, as in one house is essentially built on the lot line, which you cannot have an encroachment on that side, and the other house has to be at least 10 feet away. But that house could potentially have an encroachment. So there's been some issues and concerns about should we allow encroachments or not.
And I have one more question on that. When we change this, so we used to not have this problem because the lot sizes were bigger. Who requested that we make those lots smaller, that we shrink them up? Was that a request from the developer themselves?
Ms. Maurer, yes. In particular, we're seeing concerns in the Embry Mill neighborhood, which is Zone Plan Development 2. The board received a request last year to reduce lot widths and lot sizes for Plan Development 2 single-family homes, and that was granted. And that's where we're seeing some of these concerns is in these
So
smaller
they're coming back and asking
lots.
for consideration on now the encroachment issue that they created from shrinking their lot sizes.
Yes, and this has been
Okay.
something that was brought up to staff by some of the home builders and their concerns, and also staffs as well, because we have issued these permits. Of the 129, 103 were the window well exits, and 26 were encroaching exterior stairwells that were, again, subterranean. So the issue for the.
I'm sorry, Mr. Harvey, and this might be a question for the county attorney. Is it possible for those 129 where we made a mistake to do some sort of granting them a non-conforming use? Because what I don't want to do is I don't want to punish the homeowners that have unknowingly bought these homes with these encroachment issues. I mean, they were acting in good faith. I believe everybody was acting in good faith on these 129. Is it possible that we could do some sort of recognition that they are a non-conforming use due to encroachment? Do we have to change the entire ordinance?
Supervisor Maurer, we have not explored that issue. We can look into that and bring an option back to the board that's different from a code amendment.
I can also say, Mr. Chairman, that some costs have already been charged to these new homeowners, and they've already paid them at their closing, and did so because of the changes that we made before, and basically the builder said it was our fault.
That's normal.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Cohen.
And this is for Ms. McClendon. So if I remember my planning commission days well, if we were to send this down to them now the way it is, and you did more research, they could not change it to what you said about the non-conformity, correct? Because that would be a completely different thing. So we really wouldn't want to send this down to planning commission as is if we were going to explore what you're talking about.
Yes, Supervisor Cohen, excuse me. I would note two things. This is new business, so this will come back at the board's next meeting. So hopefully we would have more information for you at that time. If the board would allow or would like the planning commission to be able to make changes, that can also be added to the resolution. Currently, it does not allow modifications. So those are additional options for the board to consider as well.
Thank you.
Continue, Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When this was discussed at the CEDC committee, the committee was not satisfied with moving forward with this ordinance, however, felt it was important that it be discussed at the board level, and the request was made to have the building official here as well as one of the members from the fire marshal's office to be able to answer any questions the board may have, specifically with any questions regarding clear path through the side yard areas to handle a fire response and/or any building code matters related to public safety.
Mr. Harvey, I'm sorry, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman.
Ms. Shelton, go ahead.
Mr. Harvey, I'd like to ask some questions of Andrew Milliken. I'm sorry, I don't know his title. Fire Marshal Milliken? Okay, thank you.
Andrew Milliken. He's awesome.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Deputy Fire Marshal Milliken and Ms. Shelton, any questions?
Yes, sir. I would ask that you attend this meeting because have you looked at these 29 different locations that we have in Emery Mill? Or not all 29, but have you looked at them at all?
Sure. To provide a little bit of clarification, we, as the Fire Marshal's Office, actually are not involved with the review process for both the emergency escape opening as well as the zoning component of this. It is something that we are very knowledgeable about, obviously, something that we are aware of, and we are well aware of the scenario and the situation, but we have not been a part of the review process up until this point. But at your request, we have been brought up to speed to where we're at.
I have a very simple question. And my concern was, and if you look at our package, it says emphasis has been placed on the firewall regulations and not on the zoning. That works for me, frankly. I like that we put emphasis on the firewall regulations. So my question to you is, looking at those existing homes that have been built to date, do they meet fire code?
That is a question for our building official who is here,
Okay.
and they can speak to that issue. I would say that the egress window consideration is a separate issue than a fire separation or firewall issue, but I think the building official could speak more specifically to that.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Any other questions?
All right, thanks.
Mr. Harvey, I remember when we changed this ordinance, I think I voted against it, but that doesn't matter now, but can we reverse it? I mean,
Mr.
can
Chairman,
we go back to the
certainly
normal lot size?
The board in your zoning powers has the authority to change lot sizes. That would be something that would require a separate action
Correct.
and discussion. That would place some of the lots in the non-conforming status as referenced earlier. So that would be, again, at the board's
Yeah,
discretion.
we dealt with that. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Harvey, I appreciate it. Item number 18, consider, I'm sorry.
I thought we were going to ask the building official to address these issues.
The fire issue.
Well, who asked? Cindy asked?
Yeah.
Cindy asked.
Yeah, come on up.
Sorry.
Sorry. Y'all just have to write this stuff down for me.
Mr. Chairman, my name is
How are
Carrie
you?
Jameson. I'm the building official.
Ms. Shelton?
Yes, ma'am. I'll go back to the same question I asked. In these 129 non-conforming developments that we have in these apartments or townhomes, do they currently meet fire code in relationship to having a firewall to be that close to another building?
They currently meet building code concerning the separation distance between the actual wall and the property line. Building code takes the separation requirements from property line to the actual structure. So I think there's a disconnect maybe, or it doesn't meet along the same lines as a zoning requirement would be. That's the consideration. There's distances between houses for zoning, I think. I don't want to, I don't, that's not my forte, but building code is straight structure to property line, and there's no building adjustment lines for that.
So you're saying it's perfectly safe to have them this close together?
As long as you have between, if there's an opening, it has to be a minimum of 5 feet away from the property line with no fire, with no penetration, with a penetration in the wall. We don't take the actual projection of the window well out. We only take it from the wall opening to the property line. So it meets our building code regulations.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Ms. Baumke?
So I have a question for Deputy Fire Marshal Milliken. I've received a couple emails from former firefighters as it relates to our cluster ordinance this evening. So one of my questions is, I've been doing some research on the internet that you know is always very dangerous, but one of the points that's been made that a lot of our products that are used in these homes these days are, I'm going to get myself in trouble, maybe not fire retardant, and that also the materials that are used go up in flames very quickly. And if you've got homes that are that close together with windows, that it makes things even more combustible. Do you have an opinion on that, Mr. Milliken?
Well, I will share, just to be brief, I would not like to take a whole lot of time. I could talk for a while on this topic, but to answer, I guess, two questions that I heard from you. First being the contents and the materials that homes are constructed of today as compared to decades previous. It is very clear and very evident that homes today are not are more susceptible to more rapid and more intense fire growth today based on the plastics, the different types of materials that we have. There are also other safety protections that are available and in place that have made buildings safer, not to include home fire sprinklers. But to answer your question briefly on that, a home decades ago may have taken 20 minutes to get to a stage that we call flashover, where an entire room is involved. Today, with current home furnishings and materials, that time frame is reduced down to minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes time frame. So that gives you an impression, I think, of the changes that we've been seeing over the years. To answer your question about proximity of homes to each other, certainly as we have closer homes together, that reduces the time frame that we have to get a situation under control, and would potentially take an incident that would involve one structure to those that would involve multiple. We have seen that in the past as we have homes that are close proximity. To the point that was brought up about, do homes that are only 5 foot from a property line, do they meet minimum code? Yes, they meet minimum building code. Is that safe? I think that is a judgment that the board and others have to take a look at. How much time do we have? That code, to reference the 5 foot, would be the same code that would be applicable in a place such as Fairfax or Richmond or other places that have more resources, lower response times, things of that nature. And those are important considerations, especially when we're talking about our rural areas. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Mr. Milliken. Okay, moving on. Does anybody else? I don't want to miss anything. Mr. Harvey, go ahead.
Thank you. Just for clarification for staff's purposes, is the board inclined to send this forward to the next meeting as a consent item or unfinished business, or would the board prefer this be deferred?
I think it needs to come back as unfinished business. So we can have more discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey. Item number 19, consider rescinding a memorandum of understanding with Mosaic Acquire Capital LLC associated with the Acquire Town Center. Mr. Smith.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mike Smith. I'm the Deputy County Administrator. And I'm here to talk about consider rescinding the Acquire Town Center incentive agreement. In 2015, the board approved an incentive agreement with Mosaic Partners Limited, which became effective on January 1st, 2016. This agreement came with the understanding that development of the Acquire Town Center would follow very shortly after. The county's principal goal is to attract investment and to facilitate development of a quality destination with retail, commercial, and community opportunities at the Acquire Town Center. Since the agreement's inception, the county has met several times with the developer to understand the reasons behind the current progress and the sought opportunities to find a mutually beneficial and prudent path forward. The county's responsibility is to encourage economic development across the community. That includes considering how best to encourage development at the Acquire Town Center. No development has taken place to date at the Aquia Town Center. Therefore, the board should consider if this incentive agreement is in the best interest of the county. As this is a new business item, no action is requested of the board at this time. However, the board will be asked to consider this at a future meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any questions for Mr. Smith? Ms. Mauer?
Wait if somebody else has questions.
Mr. Dudenheffer?
Okay.
Ms. Smith, could you briefly explain what the incentive is for the public who are listening? And with emphasis on the fact that they haven't received any money or any payments as of this time, but why this is such a tricky issue here?
Right, the incentive was on incremental tax refunds, so once the development was built, it would bring in additional taxes for the county. The county's agreement to incentivize the developer was to pay back some of those taxes, a portion of those taxes, back to the developer at his cost. And so the current agreement was to pay back $6.25 million over 15 years of a percentage of the taxes that were paid by the development to the county. Since there's been no development, there's been no incremental tax, therefore we have not paid the developer any money.
Would you just quickly explain the escalator portion of the
Right.
incentive?
If you spend, for instance, if you spend $1 million today, 10 years from now, that $1 million would be worth more money. And so if you're going to get paid back the same amount that you spent today, you would have to be paid back an escalated amount depending on the escalation factor, whether it was the CPI or in this case, this agreement had an escalation factor of 5%. So that when they borrowed money, if they borrowed $6 million at 5%, they would pay an interest on that $6 million, and our 5% escalator would match that interest.
So just one follow-up question is, so the fact that there has been no activity on the site, short of a couple of cleanups and whatever, the developer himself is actually in as good or better shape than he ever was, because now we're compensating for his lack of activity on the site over time.
Right now, we haven't paid anything out, and it would depend on the development and what came in the incremental tax, because he still only has 15 years to collect that amount. So you could say, yes, that's possible that we would be paying more because 3 years has passed, but it would depend on the development.
Thank you.
So what is the value? Because the 5% escalator had started ticking on January 1st, 2016. So originally, the agreement was $6.25 million that they would receive. What's the value of what they're going to receive now due to the 5%?
Well, it actually works backwards, so you go by the payments, and then you calculate it out. But if you just, even though this isn't the correct way to do a net present value calculation.
Add the 5% interest?
But if you just add 5%, we'd be at about $7 million currently.
So the value of the tax, they've done nothing, but the value of this tax rebate is now $7 million, where it was originally $6.25 million.
Correct.
And what was?
Although the county doesn't pay any money out front other than the incremental taxes that come in, it is a liability on the county, and that is one of the issues that the county should consider when they think about this agreement.
So it's a liability.
It is a liability against future taxes.
Is this liability highlighted in our CAFR at all?
I don't believe so. That's-
Okay. So one of the agreements, and I want to get into the particulars of the agreement, because I've always been concerned about this. When this came up 2 years ago, I wasn't on the board when this was voted on. And one of the biggest concerns I had was that it never hit an agenda before it was voted on. There was a closed session, and then they voted on it after closed session. So I'd like to walk through the agreement if we could.
How much time do you plan on taking?
I'm not going to
Because-
take an hour and a half.
Well,
I have some questions.
We've got a closed session and a busy schedule, so a lot of I appreciate your questions, but let's limit the time.
I will limit the time, I promise, because there are a couple of factors that are very concerning to me. Number one, one of the aspects of the agreement was 160,000 square feet. When they submitted their plans, what was the square footage that they submitted their plans?
I believe it was about that. I don't have that information, but I believe that was the plan at the time.
And we were also hoping to get 56 million in tax revenues according to this agreement. Is that same value still applicable, appropriate? Are we still going to receive $56 million in value?
It is not.
Okay. So the 56, and then also there was a timeline that was added to Exhibit B, and it said that they would start the project, or we would start seeing revenues from this project around 2017. But to date, what is the tax revenue that we're receiving from the project? And this is very important, because originally we were receiving $130,000 in tax revenue from this project. What are we receiving now?
Currently receive annually $66,000.
So we receive actually half of what we used to be receiving.
That is correct.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, that is all of my questions.
You did a wonderful job, Ms. Meyer. Thank you so much for moving forward. Anything else, Mr. Smith? Any
Yes, sir.
other questions of Mr. Smith?
Mr. Smith,
Yes, sir.
just to clarify, this tax revenue that we have right now, the 66,000 is what we receive. The only thing in there really is a Rite Aid, a dry cleaner, a Subway, basically, right in that little portion. But, well, actually, the Rite Aid is the only one, because the Subway and the dry cleaner are in the office building. So, but what you didn't take into consideration was what could be generated future revenues after the development of this town center. And we've seen some projections as to what those are. Can you help us remember? I think anywhere between, let's say, just throwing out generic numbers, $500,000 a year
Right,
to
the
over $1 million.
projections with the original development were higher. It had a grocery store and a few other things. The grocery store is no longer in the picture. However, the projections with a current development, if it went in right now, could be as much as $500,000 for the county and up to $1 million in out years.
Right. So, and isn't it true that the reason the tax revenue for the county was basically went down to $66,000 a year is because they tore down the movie theater that Mr. Dudenheffer just talked about a little while ago, and is going to move to the Garrison in the the Garrisonville district. And so we will actually be getting that plus probably more, because it's going to be a much nicer theater. Is that correct?
Correct. The drop in tax rate was due to the removal of that building.
Okay, so in the end, we're going to receive more any way you look at it. Rescinding the agreement, to me, sends a bad message to any kind of future commercial developer that we, Stafford County, are willing to renege on any agreement that we have with a commercial developer. So I think I would caution the board on how we move forward with this, and hope we can continue negotiations and have a win-win outcome for everyone on this.
Ms. Maurer?
I do have one final question. Did Mosaic actually ask to have their plans pulled and their bond refunded? Did they ask our planning department?
They're working to submit a separate plan, and they have asked to have their securities removed so they can submit a new plan.
And when did they say they were submitting the new plan?
I don't have the details on that.
So they're pulling their plan, they're asking to have their securities removed, but they gave no date certain as to the resubmission of new plans.
I don't have dates on any resubmissions.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Weren't the current plans that are in, including a grocery store as the anchor in the back, was that part of their present plans that they have in, and they no longer have that plan?
That is currently the plan that has been approved.
And so plans change over time, right? Thank you.
The last question.
Can they amend their plans and without asking to pull their securities?
I'll ask for some help from Jeff Harvey on that.
Chairman Snellings, Ms. Maurer, the developer can amend their plans at any given time. The security value is based on the cost of the physical improvements on the site, as well as erosion and sediment control. So the security estimate would have to be updated based on what the new plan would reflect.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey. With that, I'll ask Mr. Dudenheffer to read us motion into closed session.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Whereas the board desires to hold a closed meeting for discussion and consideration of the acquisition of real property for a public purpose and the disposition of public property where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position and negotiating strategy of the board, and discussion concerning a prospective business where no previous announcement has been made of the business's interest in locating a facility in the county, whereas pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2-3711A3 and A5, such discussion may occur in closed meeting. Now therefore be it resolved by the Stafford County Board of Supervisors that on the 22nd day of January that it be and hereby does authorize discussion of above matters of closed meeting.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Mauer. Any discussion? Cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion carries 7-0. We're in closed session. The board will reconvene at 7 p.m.
The actions of the Stafford Board of Supervisors in the closed meeting on January 22nd, 2019.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Cast your votes. Tally the vote. Motion carries 7-0. We are adjourned until 7 p.m. Everybody to rise. Mr. Cohen will lead us in prayer. Mr. Cavalier will lead us in the pledge.
If we could bow our heads. Lord, we thank you for our many blessings, for family, friends, and for living in a country that allows us to have influence over decisions and to have a say in our government. Please watch over our public safety personnel who risk their lives for the citizens of Stafford every day. Watch over for those men and women who are in our armed forces, as well as for their families. Be with us and aid us in our decision-making. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This time I'd like to turn the meeting over to Mr. Cohen, who has a proclamation to present.
Thank you, Sarah. Caesar and Marie and Andrew. A large part of what we do is public service, and it's awesome when we get to recognize people for their public service, not just the people who work in government, not just people on boards and commissions, but citizens. And we had an example in Stafford of 3 amazing young men who went to the extra distance to serve their community. And so we have Cesar Cassiano, and his mother Marie is here, and then Deputy Fire Marshal Andrew Milliken will explain what a terrific work that these young men did.
All right, so Caesar, you're going to have to correct me when I'm wrong, but we'll try to keep this brief. Back in July, Caesar was riding through his neighborhood along with his friends Miles and Deshaun, and they were riding their bike, and they noticed some smoke and I think a little fire coming from the back side of a townhouse. Caught their attention, and they decided to go investigate to see what was going on. And as they got over there, they noticed that there was a small fire to the back of the townhouse, and that nobody else really seemed to know what was going on, what was happening. Without hesitation, Caesar and his friends were able to find a garden hose, extinguish the fire, and then knock on the door and let everybody know what happened. And they stuck around till our crews were able to arrive, and they shared what they did. And I believe it was your comment that when the fire crews had asked Caesar, why'd you guys do what you did? He said, well, I'm a Boy Scout, and that's what we do. And I think tonight, it's very fitting. We've got some other Boy Scouts, I think, in the audience here. And it speaks to not only your character, but also to the character of the community organizations that, like the Boy Scouts, that come alongside our young people. And just a fantastic job that you did. We're very proud on behalf of Chief Cardello, the entire Fire and Rescue Department. We're very proud of what Caesar, Miles, and Deshaun, their actions, their character. And we definitely want to publicly recognize you for that.
It also speaks volumes to their parents, so I think that Marie here deserves a lot of credit for raising such an outstanding young man. So we have that we like to give out, because the world revolves around whereases. We have a proclamation for you that you can put up on your wall, run around school with. Whereas Cesar Cassiano, age 11, Miles Mason, age 12, and Deshaun Green, age 11, are 3 outstanding Stafford County youths, and whereas these individuals noticed a fire had started on the exterior of a townhouse in Rappahannock Landing in the summer of 2018, and whereas they worked together to extinguish the fire using skills learned through the Boy Scouts and save the interior of the structure from damage. And whereas their quick thinking and action prevented the fire from spreading to other homes in the neighborhood and causing catastrophic damage, and therefore now it be proclaimed by Stafford County Board of Supervisors on this 22nd day of January 2019 that it be and hereby does honor and recognize Cesar Cassiano, Miles Mason, and Deshaun Green for their selflessness and service in putting out the fire in Rappahannock Landing. Did you want to say anything, or we just want more snow days? Okay, cool. Thank you very much for everything you do. Thank you, man.
At this time, we will do presentations by the public. I would ask that if you're here on any one of the public hearings this evening, to hold your comments for the public hearing. When you come to the podium, you will have 3 minutes to discuss any issue or problem that you may have with the board. When you get to the podium, we would ask that you state your name and your address, at which time the green light will come on to the right. When the yellow light comes on, you have about a minute left, and when the red light comes on, it's time to shut down your comments. I do have speaker cards. I have 3 speaker cards. 2 of them concern the public hearing on cluster subdivisions. The other one is not a public hearing, so Mr. Fred Robinson coming up to talk about downzoning. Mr. Robinson.
I'm here because I got a letter today talking about a proposal I thought at this meeting to change the zoning on agricultural land from 3 acres by right to something else, suggested perhaps 5 acres by right. And that's what alarmed me, because I have a farm here in the county, and it seems to me, of course, entirely unjust to take away a substantial portion of the value of my property, which it would do. More unjust, frankly, for someone who has a lot less property. If you have 9 acres, you are genuinely done. You lose 2/3 of the value of your property. But the specific aspect that bothers me, we have a property that we tried to sell, and in fact did sell. It got temporary preliminary subdivision approval, and it was when they parceled it out, the best they could do was about 4 acres, per parcel. They couldn't do 3 acres because our land, like most land in this county, is hilly. It has gullies running through it. It has wetlands. It has some swamp. And so if you're talking about changing, you have to recognize in whatever you do that there's already a natural impediment to developing at 3 acres per lot. So I would suggest that the subdivisions that have been done at 3 acres per lot probably are a lot more economical for the county in terms of numbers of children that go to school, the services that are demanded for them, than what the cluster zoning or other developments you see. And frankly, I think it's very hard to put on the backs of the landowners something, I'm not sure what the rationale is, because the letter doesn't say, and I guess that's a private part of your hearing, so I won't hear until some future time. But I would urge you to not do that. I mean, for 50 years now, it's been three acres per lot by right, and I cannot see any good reason to change it at this time. Thank you very much for your
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Thank you, Mr. Robinson. We appreciate your comments. Let me make something very clear to everyone tonight. There is absolutely nothing on the agenda concerning downzoning. The letter that you received and that I received as a property owner was put out by a developer. I don't know why he put it out, but there's absolutely nothing on this agenda concerning downzoning. The only thing on the agenda tonight concerning land use is to change and expand the cluster subdivision map, which is required by law. With that said, anyone on my right wishes to address the board on any subject except for public hearing. Anyone on my left wish to address the board?
Good evening. I'm Elaine Callender, 622 Lancaster Street in Falmouth District. I just wanted to take a minute tonight to suggest to the board that you attend some of the community dinners that are held in our region to serve food to the homeless. And I'm suggesting that not so that you go to help prepare or serve food, but rather sit down and speak to the people who are there and learn their stories. There's a terrible crisis in our community, and this was going on before the government shut down. There are a lot of people out in the cold or struggling in so many ways just to have housing and food on a table. So I know you've asked for an updated study on the housing situation, but what you really need to do, you know, statistics are fine, but you really need to sit down and talk to these folks and find out what they're going through. And government needs to step up. It shouldn't just be private organizations that are handling this crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Callender. Just for information purposes, the board will be serving dinner, preparing and serving. I'm not a very good cook. I don't know how it's going to taste, but at the homeless shelter, I believe in April. Is that correct? So we are well aware, be aware that we are doing that. Anyone else on my left that would like to speak? Sir, you want to speak? Come on up.
Yeah, good evening. Richard Dodson, 129 Walden Lane. I'm president of the Homeowners Association in Walden 10. And before I make a comment, I want to make, most people come here for criticisms and things of that nature. I've come here, this first thing, for kudos. I don't know who did it, but you need to figure out who did the timing on the traffic lights on Route 17. Give them a promotion, give them a pay raise, and then send him up to 610. Because he did a really nice job. Now, my comments. We live in a rural area, and when I moved here 20 years ago, the best internet we could get was DSL. The best internet we can get today is DSL. And where high speed was a novelty, something nice to have, as years have gone by with kids in school, kids in colleges, and home-run businesses, it's now somewhat of a necessity. It also impacts the value of your property. Verizon, the last time we talked to them, wanted $20,000 out of us to run the internet. There is high speed on Hartwood Road. They won't come down to us right off of Richland Road. I've been to other rural areas outside this county, and what I've been led to believe is when the providers go in to offer the service, the local government mandates that everybody gets the service or nobody gets the service. Obviously, that didn't happen in this situation. So I would urge you, I don't know what you can do because obviously the provider's already in the county, but anything you could do to help us expand the internet to these rural areas would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Dodson. Anyone else on my left wishing to address the board? And for you folks standing in the back, there are some seats up front. You're welcome to come on down. Come on up, sir.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Mungin. I'm at 2770 Brook Road. Kind of dovetailing on what the last gentleman was speaking about, the infrastructure for telecommunications. I know that the county has collaborated to submit a grant down to Richmond. Not sure the status of that. Hopefully that's progressing. But either way, I hope that the county, the board, has a larger plan in mind than just getting one tower or one small company to partner with. The idea of that sort of measure being sufficient to address the concerns that he brought up in his area. We have it in Marble Point Brook Road. It is incredibly detrimental to have to pay an arm and a leg to Comcast or Verizon, and that's a homeowner by homeowner solution. That's not a comprehensive solution. And I would hope that the board would exert whatever influence it has with other infrastructure providers, Dominion, to piggyback on their infrastructure to support bringing in these services into some rural areas. Telephone lines are already there. In my conversations with Dominion and with Comcast, Dominion wasn't going to play nice. I got fortunate, but if they're going to have that perspective, then I don't think that they need to be part of the service providers for our community. It has to be comprehensive, and it has to be something where people are willing to work together. And if you guys have the ability to exert some pressure on them, we would greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Munron. Anyone else on my left wish to address the board?
My name is Donald King. I live at Sylvan Court in Falmouth. Just a quick comment regarding your your clusters. I'm a victim from last year when clusters were put in behind where I live.
Mr. King, I have to interrupt you because that's a public hearing, so.
Oh, I can't speak on about that then?
You can speak in the public hearing, yes.
Oh, okay.
But not now.
Oh,
But
forgive
you
me.
can speak on anything else you'd like, though. You have something else to talk about, you're welcome.
Get new bridges across the river. Pay now, pay more later.
Anyone else like to address the board?
All right, I finally have an audience. Paul Waldowski, 8 Pickett Lane. I was here this afternoon and I was wondering if I would have anything to add, but all I have to say to each of you citizens is to watch the 3 p.m. aspect and listen to every one of their answers today. People who know me know that there are no issues, but if you listen to your elected officials, they're going to tell you there's all kinds of issues. Well, issues are opportunities, and you're only here for 4 short years unless you're lucky enough to get reelected, even if you don't win 50% of the vote. It's just amazing. Remember, the gerrymandering committee is coming in 2021. Now, as far as the internet service providers, in 2015, I ran for office, and I happened to see a family who was at the Porter Library, and they were using the internet so they could see what was going on. And I also see them in Panera, and sometimes I wonder if that guy who's there, if he needs some soup sometimes, you know? Now, some other things I saw, you know, I love Facebook comments because I don't use it that often, but I do like a good fight because I like to argue about anything. And just so you know, the 57 acres, you know, that's where the Pence fence is. That's off 610. That's in the commercial corridor. 1.5 miles from Gary's, you're going to get another car wash. So you might as well all be aware of what's going on. I also heard all about the so-called traffic that's going on. We had 146,000 people and 7 showed up. Well, I've been to the school board so many times trying to protect the kids on Mountain View High School. I got approval from VDOT to move the signs, but you know, we have $226,000 superintendents and they can't make decisions. It's just simply amazing. Also, this board loves committees, you know, so why don't you make a housing committee? And if you remember, you only want 2 board members because 3 is a crowd. I also finally heard how the utilities contracts is finally integrating with the CIP. Let me remind you that for 30 years, I don't get a county water and sewer bill. It's coming up in the Board of Equalization in the Circuit Court. We're going to get it one way or the other. You need to get that on the CIP. Like I told you, you're not doing it for me. You're doing it for the people who really need it, just like the people who need internet service providers. Yeah, I got a Burberry knockoff, just so you know. You know, I've also eaten mustard and relish sandwiches as a little boy, and I also was a Boy Scout, a Life Scout with 31 merit badges. So I'm quite astute of what's going on in this county, and you keep on bringing up state laws. Let me keep reminding you, they're Commonwealth laws, they're code, they're not issues, they're things to act on. And if you would have saw the vote this afternoon, you know, I'm a poker player. It was the 4 kings that versus the 3 queens that defeated that proposal.
Thank you, Ms. Waldowski. Anyone else on my left? Anyone else in the chamber like to address the board? Well, that said, I'll bring it back to the board. I'd like to declare a 5-minute recess so we can bring the Planning Commission up. As you know, this is going to be a joint public hearing with the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors, so we're going to take about 3 to 5 minutes so they can come up and get settled. Let me go through the rules and procedures of a joint public hearing. The board chairman will chair the joint public hearing and meeting except when the BOS chairman temporarily relinquishes chairmanship to the Planning Commission chair. The Board of Supervisors bylaws shall govern the meeting except during the Planning Commission only portion of the joint public hearing and meeting. Presentations by staff and public comments will be given to the board and the Planning Commission jointly. Members of both the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission may pose questions to staff during their presentations. Members of the board and the Planning Commission are not permitted to engage members of the other body during the debate. During the Planning Commission only portions of the joint public hearing, no member of the Board of Supervisors is permitted to participate or engage Planning Commission members in discussion. During the BOS-only portion of the joint public hearing, no member of the Planning Commission is permitted to participate or engage board members in discussion. After the final joint public hearing item, the Planning Commission members will be excused from the dais, and the board will take a brief recess. Now, if you understood all of that, we're off to the races. This time, I want to turn it over to the Planning Commission Chairman, Crystal Venucci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I'd like to call the Planning Commission meeting to order and ask Mr. English if you could please call the roll.
Mr. Apicella.
Here.
Mr. McPherson.
Here.
Mr. Bain.
Here.
Ms. Venucci.
Here.
Myself, Mr. Boswell.
Here.
Mr. Randall.
Here.
Madam Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Commissioner English. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
This time, I would like Mr. Harvey to come up. We're going to talk about cluster subdivision. This is item number 20. Consider amending the county's comprehensive plan in accordance with Virginia Code 15.2-229 by adopting proposed amendments to the Chapter 3, the Land Use Plan of the document entitled Stafford County, Virginia Comprehensive Plan 2016 to 36, adopted August 16th, 2016 regarding cluster subdivision areas. Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For brevity purposes, my presentation will cover items 20 and 21. Item 21 is an amendment to the cluster area map pursuant to the zoning ordinance. To reiterate a few things the chairman said earlier in the meeting, this public hearing is not about a downzoning. It's about where we want to allow cluster development to occur in the county and how we attempt to meet the requirements of the state code with regard to cluster development. There are two actions that are being proposed. The first action deals with the comprehensive plan. Resolution R19-11 would amend the cluster subdivision area map to redefine the locations where cluster development could occur. Similarly, the zoning ordinance would be amended pursuant to Ordinance 019-02. That would do away with the previous cluster map that's currently in effect as of today and establish a new cluster map, which would become effective upon adoption by the Board of Supervisors. Cluster development in this county applies to A1 agricultural zone properties, A2 rural residential zone properties, and R1 suburban residential properties. As part of the repeal of the ordinance, a prior ordinance did have reference to cluster development being allowed in R2 and R3 zones. That was a carryover in print text. However, we have not allowed cluster development in the R2 and R3 zones since 2012. So what is cluster development? Cluster development is a by right development option that property owners have for residential neighborhoods. They currently have the option and will continue to have the option to do what we can call conventional development. That is, if you're in a A1 zoning category, you can divide off 3-acre lots. If you're in A2, you could divide off 1-acre lots. If you're in the R1 zone, you can divide property at a density of 1.5 units per acre, which roughly equates to needing 1.33 acres in order to subdivide. That with cluster development, what that allows a property owner to do is to have reduced lot sizes and reduced setbacks in exchange for open space land. And the open space land could be used for recreational purposes for the community. It could be for land conservation purposes. It could be for agricultural, and also it could be for forestry. State code requires Stafford County to have clusters development regulations apply in the county. Specifically, we have to accommodate cluster development in at least 40% of our unimproved agricultural and residential zone properties. The proposed expansion of the area for cluster development would ensure compliance with these state code requirements. As some background, throughout 2018, there was a lot of discussion with both the Planning Commission and Board about cluster development. In March of 2018, the Board adopted a cluster area map which specifically defined where cluster development could occur. But the board and planning commission have been dissatisfied with some of the results of cluster development. So the board in April asked the planning commission specifically to do two things. One, revisit the map, and two, look at some comprehensive revisions to the regulations. The public hearing tonight is to deal with the map. The regulations are still being developed by the planning commission. In November of this past year, the Planning Commission finalized its recommendations and sent them to the board. The Planning Commission gave the board 3 potential options to consider for a map. A map option that had a 50% unimproved land eligible for cluster, then 55% and 60%. The board received a briefing on those map alternatives on November 27th, and then on December 13th had a work session and concluded with the map that will be discussed at tonight's public hearing. Specifically, the board took the 60% map that the Plan Commission developed and whittled that area down to be closer to 50%, with the goal of attempting to spread cluster development more evenly across election districts. This is the current cluster area map, and this is the map that would be repealed. This map identifies 2 areas, and the one area has caused a little bit of confusion when people looked at the map. We have an area within the county called the Urban Services Area. It's generally in these locations. And the Urban Services Area is locations in the county where we intend to have residential zone property and higher density development. These are areas where you're going to typically see public water and sewer provided, curbs, gutters, sidewalks, street lights. These are areas that could be served by Fred bus service. So this is where we have more intense development. And it's an area that's discussed throughout our comprehensive plan as where we want to condense and consolidate future development. The areas outside the urban services area shown in orange on this map are in our rural areas. And they are areas generally adjacent to the urban services area where if we had to extend infrastructure in the future, we potentially could. This is the proposed map that was based on the Planning Commission's work as well as the board's additional analysis. This proposed map approximates 49.72% of the unimproved land in the county that's zoned agricultural or residential, and it identifies it for potential cluster development. That percentage was based on significant analysis. Staff reviewed over 4,000 parcels of land to verify whether a new building permit has been issued or any structures have been built on the properties. Under the term of unimproved land, that's basically any land that doesn't have any taxable improvements on it. So part of the reason why we're here tonight is that when the board adopted the cluster map in March of last year, the percentage on that map was close to 41%. And we know that Stafford County is a rapidly growing locality. In order to maintain compliance with the state code, we had to reconsider the map to have a higher percentage. So we would have some time before we'd have to come back to another public hearing and send notices out to property owners. Staff is recommending that we consider adopting the map when we do our 5-year updates with the comprehensive plan. The last comprehensive plan was adopted in 2016. The 5-year update would be in 2021. So we'd have at least another 2 more years before we need to reconsider the map. This map here highlights the changes from what's currently in effect today and what's being proposed with tonight's public hearing. The areas in red are shown in this location are areas that are being reduced from the cluster map. So they would no longer be eligible for cluster development. The areas in green on the map are additions. These are areas where cluster development currently was not allowed, but now would be allowed based on this proposed amendment. As I mentioned earlier, conventional development is always permitted anywhere in the county and will continue to do so. This public hearing will have no bearing on that. We did send out public hearing notices pursuant to state law for all properties that were zoned R1 suburban residential above 11,500 square feet in size, A1 agricultural, and A2 rural residential. There was 27,500 and 72 letters sent out. Again, the amendment is really only affecting those people that are wishing to subdivide their property and specifically looking at cluster development alternatives for their proposed subdivision. The revised map does give us a hedge to maintain compliance with state code for a few years. And again, as I mentioned, we would attempt to reevaluate it at our 5-year update to the comprehensive plan. The staff is recommending that the board consider adopting the amendments to the comprehensive plan as well as the zoning ordinance pursuant to Resolution R19-11 and O19-02. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey. Any questions for Mr. Harvey? Yes, Ms. Bunk.
So the last time we approved our, updated our comprehensive plan, if I refresh my memory, was 2000, was it 15? 16. Okay, so we'll do it in 21. All right, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Mr. Harvey, I just want to underscore one thing you said, or maybe you can for us. This is not the last time we're going to do this. I mean, doesn't state law require us every time it gets around 40%, we have to come back in and open up more land for clusters? Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
So as we go through time, staff would have to evaluate all the properties in the county that are unimproved and look at how many are in the cluster area versus how many acres are outside the cluster area to see what our percentage is. It could vary one way or another. If we see a lot of development in the rural areas, that could mean that our percentage in our cluster area is higher than the near 50% we have today, or vice versa, depending upon how development occurs in the county.
So there will be a day, unless state law changes, that the entire county will be opened up for cluster.
Could possibly be, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Mr.
Harvey?
Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Appicello.
Mr. Harvey, can you pull up the map that shows the new proposed extended areas?
Is this the map you're referring to, Commissioner Apicella?
Yes. So there was some logic to the areas that were added, right? It just wasn't something that somebody threw on a dart at and said, hey, let's just add that. There was some methodology that was utilized.
Correct, Commissioner Apicella. The Planning Commission developed a suitability matrix which looked at a number of factors to where it ranked properties in areas based on what properties and areas may be most suitable for cluster development. Some of the factors that were considered were proximity to public water and sewer, areas that had restrictions as far as well yields, proximity to Quantico Marine Corps base bombing ranges and noise impacts, and other suitability factors. The Board of Supervisors took that into consideration when they adjusted the map accordingly. As I mentioned earlier, they looked at the 60% map and reduced it down to 50% based on individual considerations for their election districts.
Thank you. One more point, and you sort of said this, but I just want to reiterate it. We're at a point where we have to expand the map area just to stay in compliance. As more development occurs in the already designated area, it has to be offset with something that's not improved. Is that sort of correct?
Correct. In abundance of caution, we're proceeding to move forward so we stay in compliance.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr.
Chairman.
Cohen?
Yes, very quickly. And just so that people understand, is it true that the area in the urban service area is in the cluster area?
Supervisor Cohen is correct. It is in the cluster area.
And just because an area can be a cluster doesn't mean that it is required to be a cluster.
That is correct. It's an option of the property owner for their consideration how they want to subdivide their land.
And by a cluster, just a normal iteration of it, it does not increase density in those areas.
That is correct.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? Not at all. Thank you very much, Mr. Harvey. At this time, I'm going to open the public hearing. Once again, I'd like to remind everyone that you do have 3 minutes. You must stick to this topic, cluster subdivision ordinance. Once you come down and state your name and address, the green light will come on. When the yellow light comes on, you have about a minute, and when the red light comes on, you're out of time. With that said, I do have 2 speaker cards. Yes, this public hearing is going to cover both items, item number 19 and item number 20. 20 and 21, I'm sorry. First speaker card I have is Lorena Kreitzer.
Lorena Kreiser, 1339 Poplar Road. Some 10 years ago, our family chose to establish a stream and wetlands mitigation bank on our farm in Hartwood. This was to help fund our father's health care expenses as he battled the devastating effects of dementia the final years of his life. This allowed us to keep our father living at home on the farm he loved for as long as possible. When our father passed away in 2017, he was buried in the cemetery on the farm that had been his home for over 50 years. Establishing the Stream and Wetlands Mitigation Bank involved an expensive, years-long process of obtaining approval from the county and various federal and state agencies. It has been approved to restore and preserve most of the streams and wetlands on our property. A total of 310 acres of our father's 700-acre farm has been placed under a protective easement, creating a large nature preserve. We feel strongly that the completion of this project is important for the following reasons. This would be an environmental win for the county, since livestock would no longer occupy several miles of stream in the Potomac Creek watershed, draining into Able Lake Reservoir. Restoration of the streams and wetlands inside the nature preserve would result in long-term ecological benefits and improved water quality. An endangered plant species habitat for the small world begonia was included in the nature preserve as well. The 310-acre nature preserve would be protected forever and remain undeveloped open space, which is a natural asset for the county. The nature preserve would serve as a permanent memorial to our father who loved this land. While contemplating this project, we hired an engineering firm to evaluate its economics. County rules at the time included by right cluster development. We decided to put a large amount of acreage inside the nature preserve that is actually suitable for development. We did this with the understanding that our protected land would be allowed to count towards the cluster open space requirement. Currently, 2 of the 4 planned restoration phases have been completed. We wish to see the 2 remaining phases completed. We followed the county's rules in good faith, and we relied on them in decisions that we made. Excluding our property from the cluster development area will most certainly have a devastating effect for our project's economics. This could possibly threaten the completion of our nature preserve. That would be a loss not only for our family, but for the county as well. We ask that you join with us in our fight to complete this worthy preservation project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Second speaker card I have is Laurel Baker.
Good evening. My name is Laurel Baker. I live at 48 Newberry Drive, Stafford, Virginia, the Griffiths-Widewater District. I'm here on behalf of our HOA, the Perry Farms HOA, and we were astonished and concerned to see the cluster development allowed behind the Dockstone Shopping Center all the way back to Smith Lake, because the road, the existing infrastructure, is wholly inadequate. And we have engaged the county and exchanged concerns regarding the Moncure Elementary School, because the road was not included in the Moncure Road Project Improvement Plan for the increased traffic. It's barely 2 lanes as it goes by Perry Farms. It has no shoulders, really, and no sidewalks, and people use it. There are pedestrians in the roadway. When the school opens, this is going to be a huge safety problem, and it's already been, figured out. There have been studies that show that this is going to be a problem for the county. So I know the cluster development issue is very complicated. I don't know all the details. I know there was litigation involved, and Richmond was involved. but I would like to see the county going forward to get the roads and the infrastructure to support whatever cluster development that is being brought forth, and not to pass the costs, after the fact onto the county to improve the roads and the other infrastructure. Also, and finally, we have what was supposed to be a recreation open area that was included in our housing development. It couldn't be built as proposed for lots of reasons. Right now, it's not functioning. We just had to let a contract to get the silt out of it. As all of the debris and runoff comes out of the shopping center, it's silting up, and the catchment can't hold it. So as developers are developing in cluster areas, I ask that the county be mindful that these structures actually function, that they're built properly, that they are to projected capacity, and that these costs aren't passed on to the HOAs, which is what is happening now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Baker. That's all the speaker cards I have. I'm going to open it up to the rest of the audience. Anyone on my right? Yes, sir. Please come down.
My name is Wendell Chandler. I live in 92 Walden Lane in the Heartwood District. We have a small homeowners association of 10 properties. We have a 20-acre lake and a small 4-acre lake. I don't know all the details about the cluster development either, but I do see that there's a big expansion coming all the way up to Curtis Park, which is right by our property. And along the lines of what the lady just spoke about was impacts of the development. I think we get caught up in meeting numbers and percentages and all that, and I'm not sure what the gentleman was referring to about what all they considered when they expanded it and where they decided to expand it. But I would challenge the board to ask some detailed questions about what are the downstream impacts. I've lived in my home for 22 years. We've never had water go out the emergency spillway, ever. That's through 4 or 5 hurricanes. This year, now I know we've had an exorbitant amount of rain, but we've had water go out of it twice. When it rains 1 inch, the lake comes up and fills up and comes up into the woods. That's unusual. And so the only thing that's happened different are all the subdivisions that have been approved and developed out along Heartwood Road, which now we're expanding even beyond that and literally going to run beyond our property. So there's something to do with runoff, the debris she's talking about, the blockage of the drain pipes. We've replaced 2 of our own culverts. We are responsible for the dam. It's a county benefit because of fire protection. We have standpipes in there to provide water for fire, but we get no assistance on that. I would just ask the county to understand when they're approving these things and when we're making these judgments, decide whether or not there's sufficient water to support it. I understand you got some state mandates, but it's more than just percentages. There's impacts to public and it's impacts to us. We have 10 properties in there. And to do our dam like we need to do it, it's going to be about $100,000. And our dam's in really good shape. So that you do the math on that, that's a pretty expensive thing. County doesn't help on any of that. They won't even keep the culverts clean on 17. There's 2 8-foot culverts on 17, which is directly behind our dam, 1 mile. And that's part of the reason we're a high hazard dam is because the water will go over on 17. It's really going to go over on 17 if we don't keep those culverts cleaned out. They're never clean. Right now there's guardrails in it. They're probably at some less capacity in what they're designed. They're not designed obviously enough to carry the water that's in our lake. But that's a state issue we've been fussing with. I'm just asking the board to be more thoughtful and mindful and don't get caught up in all the percentages and look at what are the true impacts, whether it's silt, whether it's culvert damage, all of that, because somebody's got to pay for that, and right now it's the homeowners and it's not the county. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else on my right like to address the board? Yes, sir. Please come forward.
Richard Dodson, 129 Walden Lane. To dovetail on my neighbor's comments, it was established at your meeting, Mr. Chairman, about a year or so ago about the water issue on Poplar Road. You may recall a lady stood up and said she'd built a nice house and she drilled 5 wells and she could get 3/4 of a gallon a minute flow. I would suggest that, I don't know what water study they did. I'd like to see the results of it, but it's already been established. There's people that have built houses that have drilled wells that are having problems, and we're going to expand this further without a good study. I challenge you to take a look at that. The other thing is the stormwater management. I've spoken to the county stormwater management people. they tell me that they engineer just some crazy number like 2 inches in a 24-hour period. That's crazy. I have a dam that I have to try to engineer to a 0.9 PMF. 2 inches in 24 hours is not a very big storm. And like my neighbor just said, we've never had water in our emergency spillways. I've been here 20 years. We've had water in it twice this past year, and we haven't had a hurricane. That, to us, it's a big deal. We have a high hazard dam. If it breaches, there'll be water over 17. The 2 culverts on Richland Run that run under 17 are clogged up. There's a piece of guardrail some 20 feet long somebody threw down there. There's debris. There's trees down there that VDOT needs to take care of. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. But in closing, the law of unintended consequences. You have one side with improvements, expansion, I get it. But the unintended consequences of the stormwater issues and the water issues are serious stuff. I can't imagine the problem if these aquifers dry up after we've already done the expansion. That would be a true catastrophe. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. County Administrator, I believe that study is online. Is that correct? That water study can be accessed online? Thank you. Anyone else on my right? Yes, sir, please come down.
Good evening. My name is Tim Mason. I live at 205 Gold Cove in Aquia Harbor. I've lived there since 2007, and my daughter recently, last year, graduated from Brook Point High School and gone through the school system here. During the time I've lived here, there's been dramatic developments in houses and commercial spaces throughout the county. However, quite frankly, the school board budget and also schools have not matched that development. And my understanding is that for the last few years, they've had to redistrict multiple times in order to accommodate the existing school population because they could not fit in the different schools. A colleague of mine had their one son went to Colonial Forge, and their daughter ended up going to North Stafford, even though they live at the same residence due to districting, which is an odd way to run the railroad, quite frankly. And to that end, my question, I guess, in regards to the capital improvement plan, I believe it only calls for a new high school, and 2024 is a new school.
Mr. Mason, let me interrupt you.
Yes, sir.
The topic is cluster subdivision ordinance.
Yes, sir.
Could you stick to that topic, please?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
To that end, my concern is that in the event that you allow all this cluster subdivision in those green areas as outlined on the map, my question would be is whether or not the Planning Commission took into account the requirement to have schools space and bandwidth in order to have proper facilities. I realize that the Planning Commission analysis formula that they used, as noted in the November meeting, outlined a number of different sundry public services that are provided and were taken into account, such as well, water, and fire, and so forth. However, oddly enough, I did not see any reference to access to schools or where all these children would go to schools, assuming that the cluster developments are going to involve families. And my thought would be is that if they are going to fully develop these subdivisions and cluster divisions, that we build the suitable schools and make sure we have them for our children and our future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mason. I apologize. I should have given you a little more time because I saw where you brought it back around and wrapped it in. So thank you very much for the analysis. Anyone else on my right like to address the board? Yes, ma'am. Come on down.
Good morning, members of the boards. Nan Rollison, 22 Shore Drive, Stafford, in the Griffiths-Widewater District. My understanding of cluster subdivisions were originally developed primarily as a way to protect and preserve farms and natural resources by allowing developers some increased density in return for improved protection and linkages of farms and forests and watershed protection, goals that are all stated in our comprehensive plan. I understand the county has a state statute requirement to follow. However, I do not support passing this cluster subdivision map tonight. One, I think we have the cart before the horse. we are asking citizens to approve areas to allow higher density of development without seeing what the ordinance language is going to say. Yes, we have an ordinance regarding the areas that we want to put higher density, but we don't have the actual ordinance talking about how those cluster subdivisions are going to be developed. Two, the cluster areas, I think, need rethinking. Currently, much of the cluster areas are predominantly to the east of I-95, on top of significant tidal streams that lead to the Potomac River, and subsequently the Chesapeake Bay. If there is still legal uncertainty as to what counties can ask for environmental protection, then this current map seems to increase the pollution and the sedimentation potential of our creeks, the Potomac River, and the Chesapeake Bay. For example, in Widewater, we have some severe sedimentation occurring in Meadows Branch, probably due to some massive clear cutting that's been done on a number of hundred of acres, as an example. Developers get a profit from clear cutting the forest, the existing forest. They get increased density profit, and the taxpayers have to pay for pollution, clean up new roads, schools, and traffic. Whatever the final cluster map is adopted, we need to change the transfer development rights map overlay to overlay on top of the cluster subdivision map as an incentive to allow those areas where we have remaining farms and forests to be designated sending areas as preservation option and incentive for developers to redirect increased density to the more built-up areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rawlson. Anyone else on my right like to address the board on this issue? Seeing none, anyone on my left? Yes, ma'am, come on up.
My name is Kristen Maxon, 1816 Jefferson Davis Highway. Yeah, I was also concerned about the schools. Cluster development is by right. You have to have a right, allowing to reduce lot size in exchange for open space. It is used very closely with TDR, which is a transfer development rights, and was approved April 19, 2006. This was approved close after the Kelu versus City of New London reform to protect small homes for redevelopment areas, RDA. There was amendment to go ahead with the cluster development for undeveloped areas. And that was concerned about the schools. What about the infrastructure? What about the utilities? This law really has been written for RDA, the development areas, the areas that have already been developed. This cluster development is applied to counties that are 10% or higher growth rate in 1 year. And we are the fastest growing county, Stafford is, for Virginia. And half of the Stafford that you don't see in the cluster development is because there's less than 2,000 people per square mile, which is stated in the law that you have to have at least 2,000 people per square mile. So that'll explain a little bit about how things were selected. Chapter 10.1-1700 in the Virginia Code talks about the open space easement that is directly related and linked to the cluster development. And it says that it's non-possessory interest of public body. That means that's eminent domain. There are powerful laws under this cluster development. And I read part of the laws of the cluster development, and some of it allows the county to hold non-public meetings. So these laws are extremely, extremely powerful. You start combining these, I'm not saying we are, but you start combining these with eminent domain, the powerful laws of eminent domain. Are we protecting the small person, or are we protecting the developer? In November 17th, 2015, there was actually a private property that was taken for a private road. A lawyer had mentioned to the board that this is not proper. This is actually illegal, but the board did it in the.
Ms. Maxon, if I could get you to wrap up your comments, I'd appreciate
So
it.
so what I'm saying is, it is very important to have development areas when you take the open area spaces. And non-development areas allow somebody that already has control of huge spaces to come in and not have actual property, public utilities and schools. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else on my left like to address the board on this issue? I would remind everyone, please stay on subject. This is about the cluster subdivision ordinance map that's being expanded. Ms. Callender.
Yes, good evening again. Lane Callender, 622 Lancaster Street. I'm here, I think, for the folks who received the letter from the county and were totally dumbfounded by it because it didn't provide any real useful information other than to alert them that there was something going on with clustering. They looked at the information and it indicated they weren't in the USA without defining USA. USA, in this case, being urban service area where we have public water and sewer. But so what I was hearing from folks is they just had no idea what this was about. It would be helpful to have some community meetings in some of the parts of the county that would be impacted by this. I know you must be under some kind of a deadline that you've got both boards here together. So I don't know if that's feasible to postpone, but I know there are a lot of people who are totally confused. And even myself, as I was trying to prepare some remarks tonight, I started to print out the proposal, and it was totally illegible. A gentleman here sitting next to me said it's probably because there was a non-standard font being used. And normally I have no problem printing county documents, but this afternoon I was not able to do that. Anyway, if there is the potential of postponing, I think that would be a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Callender. I received several calls from folks reminding me that they live in the United States. Some of them from my family members that were kind of upset about it. Okay, anyone else on my left? Yes, sir, please come down.
Andrew Mudgeon, 2770 Brook Road. I hope my cynicism is misplaced, but it sounds like this is done to stay in the good graces of Richmond as opposed to do what provides some sort of flexibility for the citizens that you represent. I'd like to understand why the entire county isn't open to cluster subdivisions. If the intent is to preserve open spaces, then why are we excluding the rural areas of the county? That kind of flies in the face of the justification in my mind. As far as the map goes, putting urban service areas, the targeted ones, in the middle of proposed urban service areas is a little counterintuitive. How can you have a pocket that has the infrastructure that the urban service area represents surrounded by areas where it's not present yet? I think that that's odd, to say the least. And then the idea that recreational space should include clubhouses, tennis courts, non-pervious surfaces, that leads to the issues that have already been addressed here as far as runoff, water management issues. But I would and I would also second the previous comment that unless the ordinances are written properly, the map and this amendment aren't going to serve the objectives that you guys are saying that this is supposed to, designed to accomplish. You know, cluster development doesn't do much good when you have 4 houses that have driveways connecting to a major thoroughfare like Courthouse, right across from a high school. That flies in the face, in my mind, of responsible development and causes traffic issues. You know, kids have to cross that street when a bunch of 16 and 17-year-olds are trying to get to class. So unless you guys put rules in place before you change this, I think it's backwards. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else on my left wish to address the board on this issue?
Good evening. My name is Thomas Crop, 67 Crop Road, Hartwood Election District. I approve of the map. I like the map. I do have a couple questions about some of the text. This section, the first section, the page is on numbered, but I'll call it page 2. It's talking about the factors that you want to be changing the numbers of 40% down the road. And it says here, for example, if a home is constructed on a currently designated unimproved parcel, that parcel would now be considered improved and would be removed from the list of unimproved parcels. Well, I got a farm where I was born 70 years ago, and I'd like to build a house over there. Now, building the house shouldn't be taking the rest of the farm out of, not having to cluster. The other thing is, on this new ordinance, on the cluster ordinance, I've noticed on some of the ones we had down on Hartwood Road, those subdivisions do not connect to the adjoining property. We're not getting a traffic grid. You go in, everybody's ending up on a cul-de-sac. I'm sure it makes the home sell well, but it sure doesn't do a whole lot for transportation down the road. So I think that needs to be looked at too, but I approve of the map. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crop. Anyone else on my left wish to address the board?
Yes, again, my name is Donald King. I live on Sylvan Court in Falmouth. We had some cluster houses built behind me or cleared last year. One thing I don't think anybody took in consideration is when they're compacting roads, current or existing brick and mortar houses, I don't think any of that was taken into consideration. I had to stop the project several times while they were trying to get their compaction values on the road. And when the toilet water, my downstairs bathroom and the toilet, when my water is dancing and I can put a rock on my basement floor and it bounces up and down, it is not good for my sewer line that travels from back to front on my house. Same thing with some neighbors. Pictures vibrated off the walls, mirrors fell when the contractors were trying to get their compaction values. And I don't think it's fair for their greater good at current homeowners' expense. One of the worst ideas this board ever approved of these cluster houses. Where's all these vehicles? Where are they going? How are they going to? With no other bridges across the river, we need additional bridges across the river. Not only refurbed, but one where it needs to be put on 17. You want to put all these houses up on 17. Where's the relief going to come from? If they want to go to Fredericksburg, 95, 95's jammed up. Route 1's going to be jammed up. Where are they going to get relief? So I propose put a moratorium on any neighborhoods until the roads catch up. Because you're putting all these neighborhoods in, and there's no improvement to roads, there was no additional roads, and there's no consideration for the additional traffic. It's just, in my view, it's just bending over for the developers. So anyway, those are my thoughts and my concerns. And because of what's happening behind my house, this time next year I will no longer be a Stafford resident. I've been a lifetime resident. And because of this, I have a house 75 feet behind me where I did have woods. So anyway, if y'all would take in consideration that, no more building until you get to roads catch up. Get a couple more bridges across the river. Then do your clusters. And that way, everything will flow. Right now, everything is just stagnant. I mean, we're all victims of the traffic around here. And that is, I think it's the county's fault for the traffic problem, is for approving too much and not allowing for development of roads to catch up with all the development that the county is approving. So, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. King. Anyone else on my left?
Paul Waldowski, 8 Pickett Lane in the Rock Hill District, and I also own property in the gerrymandered Griffiths Whitewater District. Now, I'm going to use the cluster aspects to educate the audience here before the comp plan number 1 in 2016 is obviously out of date. In 2021, we have to redistrict the county. As you can see, we have 7 districts. We are gerrymandered, especially when we have elections won by 13 votes. It's just amazing to me on what happens. People need to look at the topography of Stafford County, and you need to bring this up to the Commonwealth Code. There are 95 counties. We're a distinctly unique county. We are 280 square miles, and we have 55 square miles of the 100 square miles of Quantico in Stafford County. So why don't you go over there and tell them that you're going to build some clusters, or maybe that's where USA really is. That's where the Marines are. USA. All right.
Mr. Waldowski, I would ask that you stick with the subject, which
Okay,
is the
I'm sticking.
cluster map.
Right.
addition.
1127, you were provided with 50%, 55%, and 60%. And this board says that they did an analysis of 50%. Of what? Across the gerrymandered election districts. Let's be realistic. In 2021, this place is going to be redistricted. You're unrealistic in regards to the Chesapeake Bay watershed. We have stormwater management. We had over 66 inches of rain. You have developers today that can't even get compact roads in place because they can't get anything. These are all your suitability matrix aspects. You're so concerned about public water and sewer, and yet the people in the 80s that got public water and sewer, you don't even give them water and sewer. So you need to step back, and I really commend staff. 4,000 parcels. That's really a great sample. You know, you need some statistics 101. You can come to my basement. I got a whiteboard, and I'll teach you how to lay out a statistical model so we can build a map that not only sustains today, but what is it going to look like in 2021? And finally, the rapidly growing county has been going on every 20 years since 1960.
Thank you. Anyone else on my left that would like to address the board? Anyone else in the audience at all? I'll bring it back to the board. At this time, I will ask that my fellow board members back up from the dais. I will turn this over to Chairman Vanucci and the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Chairman Snellings. At this time, I'm going to bring it into the Planning Commission. Does anybody have any questions for staff or further discussion?
Madam Chairman?
Mr. Apicella?
Just a few questions to get some clarifications. Mr. Harvey? Can you explain or re-explain what by right development is?
Certainly. Commissioner Apicella, by right development is development that can proceed under the current zoning laws without any special consideration by the Planning Commission or Board of Supervisors. It does not require a zoning change. It allows the property owner to divide their property or build on their property based on the current zoning laws.
So just kind of using a hypothetical, if somebody had 30 acres in A1, that currently allows for 3-acre lots, right? So that would potentially yield 10 development units, potentially, depending on what's
Potentially
going
on
on that
property
specific
configuration, that's
parcel.
correct.
So, just kind of springboarding off of that hypothetical, can you also explain the difference between conventional development and cluster development?
Certainly. Based on that scenario you gave with 30 acres and 10 3-acre lots, that's a conventional development. Cluster development would allow potentially that same 30 acres with 10 lots, but they could be as small as 1.5 acres in size based on our current zoning regulations.
And there's, under either conventional development or cluster development, there's no, if you went from conventional to cluster, there would be no increase in density. You wouldn't be able to build, say, 11 development units.
Commissioner Apicella, that is correct. There is one exception, though, in the residential R1 zone. The code allows for a potential increase in density upon approval of a conditional use permit by the Board of Supervisors. So that would require additional zoning approval for enhanced density.
But for most of the parcels that have been identified for cluster development, that's in the A1 district.
Correct. Most of the expansion area is in the A1 district.
Okay, so again, just to kind of summarize, there's, except for the R1 circumstance that you talked about, if someone was allowed to do a cluster development, that would not necessarily, that would not increase the yield that that person could do compared to conventional development. In either scenario, if it's a by right, they can get up to 10 units.
Correct.
On the same 30-acre
Correct.
parcel. Okay, thank you.
Okay, really quickly before any more questions, I'm going to turn it right back over to Mr. Snellings real quick.
Yeah, I made a mistake. I didn't close the public hearing, so I officially closed the public hearing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, now, Mr. Bain, I believe you had a question first.
Yes, just to clarify on that example, with a 30-acre property, if the 10 lots were developed at 1.5 acres each, that would be 15 acres. The remaining 15 acres would have to be relatively contiguous. The individual lots or development units couldn't be scattered throughout the 30 acres. The whole purpose of the cluster is to consolidate development into a smaller area to allow for a larger preserved area that would be contiguous and not broken up. Is that right?
That is correct, Commissioner Bain. That is the intent of the cluster regulations. As far as the requirements for open space, our ordinance speaks to industry standards. So if somebody has open space that's going to be in forestry, it recommends the parcels be 20 acres or larger, similar to our land use regulations. And if it's active agriculture, it'd be 5 acres or larger. Recreational parcels can be smaller and maybe more scattered around the project, but it depends on what type of open space the development is proposing and the size of the lots.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any more discussion?
Can I just ask one more
Mr.
question?
Apicella.
So whether it's conventional development or cluster development, in either scenario, the person who wants to develop that parcel, they still have to get their site plan approved, and they still have to meet the requirements for building on that parcel under either path that they would take.
That is correct. They have to submit plans to the county to demonstrate compliance with our zoning and subdivision ordinances and any building codes for housing construction.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the commission? All right. Does anybody want to make a motion?
I do, Madam Chairman. I'd like to make a motion we adopt a proposal ordinance 019-02.
I'll second that motion.
Madam Chairman, I think, do we not have to take up the resolution first?
We do, I think. We have to do the resolution first
I'm sorry.
on the comprehensive plan amendment.
So do you want me to just rescind that motion and make another motion?
Sure.
I rescind my motion then on that, and I'd like to make a motion that we recommend approval of resolution R19-11.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve R19-11. Any seconds?
I'll second that.
Second by Commissioner Randall. Any further comments, Commissioner English?
No, ma'am.
Commissioner Randall?
No, ma'am.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, we can go ahead and vote. Oh, we're going to do a voice vote, that's right, because they're set up for the board, never mind. Okay, so we'll do a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, so that motion carries 7-0. Okay, moving on to item number 21 on the agenda.
Madam Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to adopt proposal ordinance 019-02.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve 019-02, which repeals the current map and expands the map to meet the 50% requirement. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner English and a second by Mr. McPherson. Commissioner English, any further comments?
No, ma'am.
Mr. McPherson?
No.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, we'll do a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Back to you, Mr. Supervisor.
That's Mr. Cavalier. Where's Jack? Marcia, you know where Jack is? Okay, bring it back to the Board of Supervisors. Do I have a motion and discussion on R19-11?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion for proposed resolution R19-11.
I have a motion by Ms. Mauer and a second by Mr. Dudenheffer. Any discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Dudenheffer.
Just real quick, I sit here and listen to the comments by the audience, and this is pretty common, but I dare ask in the audience or in the people watching, how many people really understand what was called the Dillon Rule? If you don't understand the Dillon Rule, there's no way you can possibly understand the concepts and the things that we're doing. It's how government is run local government is governed in the state of Virginia, or the Commonwealth of Virginia, as we're reminded all the time. So we aren't out here trying to appease Richmond. We are required to, by law that has been reinforced by the state Supreme Court, we are required to comply with whatever they say we have to comply with. And believe me, there are some stringent laws that are absolutely egregious that we are dictated to by Richmond, and I'll refer to the proffer bill that was passed back in 2016. Another was some comments that talk about the foresting laws. Very complicated situation under the laws in which we are required to comply with. And the foresting laws, none of the foresting that I've seen in Stafford, while I hate it, it looks like we're living on the moon if you drive through Widewater back there. But they're complying with the foresting laws. They're not governed by the development laws. They don't become governed by the development laws until at a point when the developer files his plan. You ever notice that we don't require or can't require a developer to keep up a certain number of the trees that are on the property, because they start by developing the property under the foresting laws, they clear cut all the property, then they come in under the development laws and put it in. Do we like that? Absolutely not. So many of the comments of people say, you should do this, you should do that. I would just ask, believe me, we think of those things, we grapple with those things. We get legal opinions all the time of what exceptions can we make to the law. We're constantly engaged with our legislators. As when I was in Richmond, we were constantly talking all the time about how we can change the law to be able to do many of the things that the people in this public hearing have asked us to do. But if you really want to look at it, there's a great reference out there. It was written by the Albemarle Legal Department dealing with development, and it's a big, thick book of all the rules and how we deal with it. Mr. Harvey is an incredible wealth of knowledge when it comes to that. But if you can't understand the Dillon Rule or have never heard of that, I please ask you to go out and check on that or call me later. I'll be glad to explain to the best of my ability. So there are many things that we've had people in here say they like it, they don't like it. for various reasons on all different sides of the fence. It's a very complicated issue, and it's important. We're not, just because an item is, or a piece of property is in one of the cluster development areas, doesn't mean you're gonna get a cluster development in that area. It's just eligible, and we are required by the state to make 40% of all the land in Stafford that's unimproved available for cluster ordinance. We don't have an option to do that. So what we're doing here is trying to decide where is the place to put those. And I'm sure if you live in Widewater, you have one opinion. If you live in Hartwood, you have another opinion. It's just the way it is. We're doing the best we can with coming up with at least enough above the 40% that we don't have to come back every year and change where we're going to put this cluster ordinance. But all I can say is that if you knew how much time and energy we put into all of these different discussions and stuff, this isn't just a fly-by-night, we just show up here and vote on this stuff. So I say that, I get on my soapbox at every public hearing, every town hall meeting I have, trying to explain, and I'm always surprised that the very basis for our government is this Dillon rule, and I would bet that less than 1% of the people in the Stafford County even understand that that's the rule that we fall under. So I'll stop preaching. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Student. Have a good sermon. Anyone else on the board like to have a comment? Mr. Cohen.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the people who came out, especially those who spoke this evening. It's one of the greatest fears people have is speaking in public, so that it's great that you did. To reiterate, this is not a downzoning. Were it a downzoning, many of us would be yelling and screaming and hooting and hollering a lot louder and a lot more frequently than we did. My concern is by these mailings that go out, is that it's like the boy who cries wolf. If every single thing that comes before the board they claim is a downzoning, if and when anything that is a downzoning comes up, people are going to be desensitized to it. There certainly are individuals that are in favor of that concept, as well as there are individuals who are against that concept. And I would ask you to sort of be diligent and keep your ear open and watch these exciting meetings to find out what's going on. Just to reiterate, a year ago this time, the county was at 100%. And one of our greatest concerns, and I raised this when we looked at this last year, was that if we made a map that wasn't large enough, we would be going back and forth every year, if not sooner. And there's a cost to that. There's a cost to advertising it. There's a cost to mailing it out to people. Even in our one property, I have 1/3 of an acre, and I got a mailing saying about that cluster was being discussed. You can't subdivide my land. But the county has to, by law, by the wonderful Commonwealth, we have to send that out. And so that is a cost. And so many of our concern is if you don't make the map large enough, we're going to be wasting money on this more often and upsetting people more often. The wonderful Commonwealth sets a floor at 40%. Let us hope that Richmond will actually address this at some point and sees better ways to handle these issues. We can only do so much. So the first iteration of the map I loved. I'm not all that thrilled about this iteration. However, it does not increase density as a general concept of clusters, and it does not necessarily mean we want it. And a gentleman was asking why certain areas, why not everywhere. In my mindset is that if an area is in a cluster area, the thought process is that's where we want to put growth. And that's why putting it in the urban service area makes sense, or right adjacent to the USA makes sense. Because that's where we would rather have all these people, rather than out in the rural areas. So in my mindset, the more you hugged into that area, it made more sense. And so I'll be in favor of this map because, quite honestly, we are forced by the wonderful Commonwealth to do something. I don't want to waste your tax dollars, and I want to concentrate growth where we want it, not have it out in our rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Any other comments? Ms. Bomke.
Okay, so a lot's already been said, but I do want to just say to a number of the people who spoke up about the stormwater runoff, the dams, the concerns about silt, the culverts, you know, a lot of these are concerns of many of us on the Board of Supervisors we're seeing some of these things as well. Some of those items, I would say that most of the calls that I go on in the Falmouth district are stormwater related. Some is in very old subdivisions, and I have a few situations in newer subdivisions. If you have some of those concerns, I would recommend that you contact your supervisor. They can bring VDOT out specifically to the site, and you can maybe work together to take care of that matter. But I hear what you have to say on that. I'd also like to just mention that someone contacted me who was actually on the subcommittee along with the Planning Commission and staff and PDR that evaluated all 4,000 of these parcels. And he indicated to me it was a very impartial process, and he felt it was very fair, and there was no favoritism that was a part of the process, that it was only looking at the metrics that we had in place. So I felt very good about that. The last comment I would like to make is just to tag on to what Mr. Cohen said about developing out in the rural areas. The reason that we're trying to stay away from that is because it costs a lot of extra money. If you have homes out there, our fire trucks, our school buses, everything, if you have a fire, we're spending money on our vehicles. School buses, the same thing, transportation, all of that costs money. And it takes time in the event of fire or EMS, emergency-related services, to get to people. So that's one of the reasons we want to cluster everything within the USA and not far out from the USA. So I appreciate all of you coming out for tonight's public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bomke. Any other comments? Ms. Shelton?
I think it's widely known that I'm 100% for cluster development. And my reasons for it doesn't really matter right now because we lost that vote. And I wanted to let you know, it's just like other supervisors have done that, is that we're at the point where we've already decided that we are not going to allow cluster development within all over the county. So at that point is where we have to make a decision on what that map looks like. So we've had a large amount of data that the county has analyzed and other people have analyzed to be able to subjectively, I said that? Really, that was wrong. Objectively be able to make the decision on those processes. So our vote today is not about cluster development. It's only about what does that map look like? How are we able to balance that so we don't have to send out constant notifications to people, and also be able to somehow very objectively say, this is the area that we're going to give you the option of cluster development, and this is the area we're not. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shelton. Mr. Cavalier?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did not vote for the map that we're rescinding tonight or changing tonight because, well, first of all, I don't have a problem with clustering in general because I do think it works in some of the rural areas. But in my case, in particular, in my district, the last map included most of Widewater proper. And so those of you who live out there, some of you spoke tonight, and anybody who's driven out there to visit the state park has seen the total devastation that's been done by the timbering operation out there that Mr. Dudenheffer referred to earlier. And yes, that is a state permitted activity. And no, they don't have to plant any trees to replace what they've basically scraped the entire landscape and denuded everything. It looks like a war zone in many areas out there. So we were able to take out almost all of that area that's been denuded by this awful timbering operation that's gone out there. And now none of some of those areas would have been fine with cluster because it would have saved the rural nature of that area, preserved a lot of trees and a lot of open space that would have been beautiful. But if you see it now, it's completely changed. And the developers out there have wrecked it, just wrecked it, absolutely 100%. And so I will not reward them by allowing them to come in and do by right clustering, because that's what they were probably going to do. And now
You know, they can still do by right regular subdivisions, but they can't come in and do clusters in that area. So, you know, I think this is a much better option for Widewater, and I think it's a better option for the county in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cavalier. Any other comments? I just want to say, wrap it up, underscore what Mr. Dudenheffer said. You know, the General Assembly is in session right now, a 46-day term. And I tell you, when they're in session, I just lay awake at night thinking about what they're going to pass next that we'll be forced to do. And I sometimes wonder why they even allow local government, because they actually run this county based on their mandates, their laws, et cetera. And for us up here, many times it's a bitter pill to swallow. I've lived in this county all my life, and some of the things that come out of Richmond that we have to do, just nobody can understand it, but that's just the way it is. With that said, Mr. Dudenheffer, you have something?
No, I just want to make a motion.
No, we've already got the motion. Didn't we?
Oh, okay.
We have a motion and a second for 19-11, which amends a comprehensive plan. Please cast your votes. Tally the vote. Motion passes 7-0. Number 21, Planning and Zoning, consider repeal of Ordinance 01813, amend and reordain Stafford County Code, district uses and standards regarding cluster subdivision areas, and adopt new cluster subdivision area map. Do I have a motion? So moved. I have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a motion by Mr. Dudenheffer, a second by Ms. Baumke. Any discussion? Seeing none, cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion passes 7-0. Item number 22, joint public hearing with the Planning Commission. Consider amending and reordaining Stafford County Code, Chapter 28, regarding parking standards. Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In October of last year, the Board of Supervisors approved Ordinance 018-02, which did a comprehensive review of our parking standards in the county. The amendment changed the parking ratio rates for various uses that are allowed in our zoning ordinance, as well as change parking space sizes, and also the requirement for loading spaces. Upon adoption of that ordinance, it became effective immediately. Since adoption of that ordinance, the county has become aware of a number of development applicants who had applications in process for development projects and raised concerns about the effects of the change in parking space sizes and how it would impact their projects. In particular, prior to adoption of Ordinance 018-02, the minimum parking space size was 8.5 feet wide by 18 feet deep. The ordinance, when it changed, increased the parking space size to 9 feet wide by 20 feet deep. To address the concerns of some of these economic development prospects, we're here tonight for this joint hearing. The joint hearing would amend the zoning code, Chapter 28, Section 102, specifically pursuant to Ordinance 019-01, to essentially grandfather anybody who had an application in for a plan of development prior to Halloween of last year. A plan of development is a subdivision plan or a site plan for either a residential development or a non-residential development. A subdivision plan that would be affected by this is typically either an a townhouse neighborhood that has a parking lot, and or it could be a residential apartment complex. Other non-residential activities include industrial and commercial and institutional uses. Currently, staff is aware of 24 applications that would potentially qualify under this ordinance amendment. That is for non-residential development. There's 2 potential that have had prior preliminary subdivision plans approved for townhouse neighborhoods that could avail themselves of this amendment should it pass. The staff is recommending that the Board and Plan Commission consider adopting Ordinance 019-01.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey. Any questions from the board or the Planning Commission? Mr. Apicella?
Would it be possible to limit the I'll call it grandfathering to just commercial projects? I mean, if the nexus is because we're concerned about economic development, I can see the rationale. You mentioned that there was only 2 residential projects out of the 24, and they were at the preliminary subdivision?
In those cases, Commissioner Apicella, those projects had, one had received preliminary subdivision plan approval post the adoption of this ordinance, but I'm sorry. We have 2 of them that are subject to preliminary subdivision approvals that are pending.
So the approval has not happened yet, it's still
Correct.
under review? So again, my question is it possible to limit the grandfathering, or would we be required to do it across the board?
Commissioner Apicella, I believe there's a possibility it could be narrowed to specifically just say site plans. I'll have to defer to council for specific guidance.
The ordinance currently before the commission and the board is broad, and so if that's something the commission and the board would like to consider, we would ask time to be able to go back and evaluate the ordinance to make sure we make any appropriate and necessary changes in line with that direction.
So, just again, for the 24 projects, are most of those at the site plan development?
Commissioner Apicella, those 24 were site plans. And then there, again, as I referenced, there's 2 preliminary subdivision plans, one for Quantico Village, the other for Whitson Woods. Both of them have gone through zoning approvals and are in the plan development stages right now.
And those are the only 2 residential projects that are out of the mix?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Harvey? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair. Is there a reason, what was the basis for the October 31st date? Was that, anyway, what was the basis for it?
Commissioner Randall, that date was selected because the ordinance went into effect on October 16th. There may have been some applications that were in process of being prepared and submitted to the county. So we felt as a staff it was important to at least cover people that have filed something within the 2 weeks after the ordinance was adopted.
Okay, and then I one further question, if I could. You mentioned in here that it would have unintended consequences, adverse impact. Is that from them, or is that a determination that was made by staff? Have you gotten feedback from those commercial developments that it would provide or would be an adverse impact to their plans, or is that something that the staff determined?
Commissioner Randall, that was feedback staff received from several development proponents, especially projects that had a large parking field. Increasing the parking space size had a significant impact on the size of their parking lots, which affected grading and development costs, because several of them indicated they'd have to put in extensive retaining walls to have the same parking field as far as number of spaces.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Harvey? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Harvey. I'll open the public hearing. Same rules apply. Anyone on my right want to address this issue? Please come on down. Seeing none, anyone on my left that would like to address this issue?
How's it going? Ryan Ferrugi, 262 New Hope Church Road, Stafford County resident, local engineer. 2 things. I've got about 6 of these applications that are in. Really kind of confused about this ordinance, to be quite honest, because the part that we hear on our side is we hear from the environmental staff of Stafford County is you have to justify to us why we have so much impervious area, and yet here everyone's here asking us to increase impervious area for parking. Something I'm not quite, kind of befuddles me. But aside from that, as much as I would love to collect more fees from my developer clients to make a broad sweeping change, I really do think that you guys need to figure out a way to grandfather grandfather the projects. I mean, there's a lot of people that, and I would ask that you extend it to the end of the year, just quite honestly, because it's great that the 31st was recommended, but there were lots of plans that were put in development process in September, July, August, that take quite a while before they actually get submitted. So they were operating in good faith, and then now to have this substantial change is a burden. But that's really all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else on my left wish to address the board on this subject? If not, I'll bring it back to the board. Close the public hearing. I would ask board members to push back from the dais and turn it over to Chairman Vanucci.
Thank you, Chairman Snellings. Planning Commissioners, any comments, discussions?
I'm, again, confused about the grandfathering, about how we can do that. If you've got that many plans and if you got 24, are we or aren't we going to be able to grandfather them? Because I don't like to see the burden put back on the business or the if we've changing this and then they have to come back. So what can we do for that? I guess that's your question, Rashida or Jeff.
So I guess just to clarify, your question is if we can extend it to January 1st of 2019,
For
the
grandfather,
grandfathering?
yeah. I
And
think that's fair, but
Mr. Harvey, do we know how many more projects that would impact? Like, are we adding 10 more, 20 more? I know that's probably asking you off the cuff.
Chairman Vanucci, I'm not specifically aware of the number of projects. We'd have to investigate for specificity purposes, but generally speaking, I would assume it'd be probably we're in a magnitude of 6 to 8 projects. We typically get about 2 a month for non-residential developments. And also to clarify too, this proposed quote-unquote grandfathering would not apply to any zoning reclassification or conditional use permit. It would be specifically site plans. And the request that Mr. Ferrugi mentioned, he was referring to a number of plans that have not yet been received by the county.
all right, thank you.
Any other comments, questions on the left side here? Mr. Randall?
Yes, Madam Chair. About the comment that was made, we live in a world where we have bigger cars. My truck today is a much bigger size than it was, and it was called the same truck 20 years ago. If you ever tried to park an SUV or a truck in an 8.5 by 18, and if you put 3 of them together, I'm a big believer of this. I know what it does to parking lot sizes. I know what it does to impervious spaces. I understand that. But we have an absolute necessity to do this. This is way overdue. I think it's important that we do this as soon as possible. I'm not necessarily up for grandfathering. I know this is a problem for some, but I think to the point that this is what's best for the county, this is what's best for the residents of the county, this is what's best for the people who are driving these cars who don't want to have to park in the outer 40 because otherwise they're literally right next door, right next to the other car. This is what's best for the county, and I think if we do what's best for the county and that's the decision we make, then I'm not necessarily for grandfathering. I understand the reason why, but I also recognize what's best for the county, and I think this is it. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Any further comments on my right?
Yes, Madam Chair. Based on what Mr. Harvey said, I just want to kind of re-ask the question. So if we, looking at page 2 of the proposed ordinance, 1A, if we added the word site after 4, so it would say 4 site plans of development and continue on as currently written, you think that would essentially limit this, again, grandfathering to just the commercial projects that were under review?
Correct.
And if we made that change, or we recommended that change, would it be legally permissible if the board chose to not make that change, could they strike that word site? If they did not agree with us, since this is a joint public hearing. I'm not sure what the board wants to do. I'm just saying, from my vantage point, if it's economic development that we're trying to promote and not hinder by increasing the size of the parking spaces, I get that. That makes sense to me. So as a planning commissioner, I could see limiting it in such a way that it only helps out those commercial projects. What I'm saying is if the planning commission decided that's what we wanted to do and our recommendation, we forward it onto the board in the next couple of minutes, would they be able to change that? Or are we hindering them from, would they have to accept it exactly as we've changed it?
Commissioner Apicella, the ordinance 019-01 is what has been advertised. The Plan Commission can recommend changes to the ordinance, but that does not bind the Board of Supervisors in adoption of the ordinance. The board can take the Plan Commission's recommendation or not accept it. But ultimately, the board, if it wants to adopt the ordinance, would have to do so within the framework of the advertisement. From this discussion, I don't believe that the qualification you're asking for is adverse to the advertisement. But again, the board can choose or not to choose to accept it.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions, comments?
I'm just curious from my fellow commissioners what their thoughts are.
Anybody else have comment? I know I do, but I'll wait.
Are you, Stephen, are you kind of asking to reword this again, or?
Just one word, just
Yeah,
adding one word.
I'm kind of with you on that, so I'm,
To just add the word site plan.
Yeah.
Versus it
Yes.
being grandfathered for all, which could
Right.
impact residential.
yeah, that's what I'm.
Okay. I mean, I agree with you. I think in my district, I know of several projects that are going on that I've gotten calls from their engineers and from the owners of the businesses where they were literally knocking on the door of final approval. And this has completely set them back several months and trying to rework, which changes stormwater management. It changes the layout of the building. One lady's going to have to change her entrance. It's going to cost a couple $100,000. They have to move the building back 5 feet, all to make the spaces a little bit wider. And they were so close to approval that it kind of seems a little onerous when we're trying to create economic development and we're trying to be a business-friendly community to then change something like this and burden those small businesses. And a lot of these are small businesses with such a mundane change. So I am completely on board with grandfathering them, and I do really like your recommendation, Commissioner Apicella, on limiting it to just the word site plan approvals, so that way businesses are taken care of, but we're not really giving grandfathering into the residential projects as well. Anybody else? Okay, do we have a motion then?
Madam Chairman, I would recommend that we add the word site under section 28-102 1A after the word for, adding the word site.
I second that motion.
Okay, so we have a motion to add the word site after the word for on 28-102.
Yes, ma'am.
We have a motion by Commissioner Apicella and a second by Commissioner English. Any further comment, gentlemen?
No, ma'am.
Anyone else?
No, ma'am.
All right, we'll do a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Nay.
Okay, motion carries 6-1. Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Snellings.
Madam Chairman, I don't believe the Planning Commission actually voted on the ordinance. They voted to add the word. I would recommend the
okay.
commission vote on the ordinance.
Well,
still.
that would be a problem. Scoot back, everybody. Okay, now, do you have another motion, Commissioner?
Madam
There's-
Chairman, I would recommend adoption of proposed ordinance 019-01 with the change that the Planning Commission agreed to.
Okay.
Second that motion.
Okay, so we have a motion by Commissioner Apicella to approve 019-01, a second by Commissioner English, and Ms. McClendon is keeping us honest over here.
She is.
Any further comments? All right, seeing none, voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Nay.
Okay, motion carries 6-1. Now back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, back to the board. Item number 22, Planning and Zoning, consider amending and reordaining Stafford County Code, Chapter 28, regarding parking standards. Planning Commission has passed 6-1. Do I hear a motion from the board?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve this ordinance as amended by the Planning Commission.
Second.
I have a motion by Ms. Mauer and a second by Ms. Bomke. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Cohen.
Just real quickly, I think that the suggestion by the Planning Commission was good. I don't know if anybody on the board or if Mr. Harvey want to talk about what the impact would be if it were the end of the year versus Halloween. Is that a great number of units or is not? And by the way, as Mr. Harvey thinks or anybody else thinks, I think on the Planning Commission, I was one of the biggest problem causers that we need wider parking spaces for larger vehicles. So I'm very happy that we moved that way. But I think trying to help the businesses out is a rational thing. But I don't know where anybody else feels on that or if that would be a major issue or not.
Any other comments? Ms. Shelton?
Mr. Harvey, I have a question for you. If we were to exclude the residential development, aren't those residential developments apartment complexes and townhomes?
Ms. Shelton, in these two particular examples, they're townhouse developments. And they have parking lots as well as some of the units have driveways.
So the exclusion was going to take out those, it was going to require redevelopment, resite plans, complete new architecture diagrams, changes of all the things that Ms. Vanucci talked about to those individual developers of those townhomes. Is that correct?
That is correct. That would probably require them to re-engineer from, well, I should qualify. I've not looked at those plans to see what size parking spaces they initially proposed. Again, our ordinance sets a minimum size. It doesn't dictate that you can't have a parking space larger than the minimum.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Seeing none, cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion passes 5-2. With that, we'll take a 5-minute recess so the Planning Commission members can clear the dais. I really want to thank each and every one of them for being here tonight. You did a great job, and thank all the citizens, too. We have one more public hearing, so we'll take about a 3 to 5 minute recess so we can get things kind of organized. Thank you. #23, consider an amendment to Stafford County Code Section 28-185, conditional use permits, to amend the standard for revocation of a conditional use permit, proposed ordinance 019-18. Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Mr.
We
Chairman.
kept you busy tonight.
Certainly. Glad to be here, though. This proposed code amendment would change the terms in which the Board of Supervisors could revoke a conditional use permit. In our standard language for conditional use permits, we stipulate as a condition that the use permit can be revoked for any violation of the conditions or applicable federal or state standards. Our local ordinance specifies in order for the board to revoke a conditional use permit that it must demonstrate willful noncompliance with the ordinance and those conditions. This is a higher standard than what the state requires. In surveying our surrounding jurisdictions, it's also a higher standard than they apply. It's also very difficult to prove if someone willfully disobeyed the ordinance or requirements of the conditions. It places a bigger burden on the board to determine if someone was willful, and also is very confusing to the public as to whether, and the property owner to determine whether willful noncompliance was met. The Planning Commission has held its public hearing, is recommending that the ordinance be amended to strike the word willful and update the code section reference for the state code in that provision. Staff supports the Planning Commission's recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey. Any questions for Mr. Harvey? No? Thank you, Mr. Harvey. This time I'll open the public hearing. Once again, I remind you, when you get to the podium, please state your name and address. You'll have 3 minutes to talk about the subject. When the green light comes on, it's a go. When the yellow light comes on, you have about a minute. And when the red light comes on, please close up your remarks. Anyone on my right wishing to speak to the board concerning this item? Anyone on my left? Seeing no one, I bring it back to the board and close the public hearing. Do I have a motion?
Move for ordinance 01918.
I have a motion by Mr. Dudenheffer, a second by Ms. Shelton. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, cast your votes. Tally the vote. Motion carries 7-0. That ends our business for the evening. Meeting adjourned.